Marc, what do you think makes you different than the thousands of other screenwriters who came to LA? During your time here, what do you think made it different for you?
Well, I think I was very, very lucky in the fact that I was enthusiastic about science fiction from when I was a small boy. And science fiction, unlike a lot of other genres, the fans became the writers. And so they had a sense of wanting to pay it forward. So when I noticed that the same writers were writing for Star Trek and Outer Limits and Twilight Zone, as were writing the short stories and books that I was reading, and the novels, Ray Bradbury, Harlan Ellison, Theodore Sturgeon, Richard Matheson, etc., I could then go to science fiction conventions when I was a teenager, and I sought these wonderful people out, and they became mentors and friends. That helped enormously. And also, I just had such a passion for writing. I had a sense of calling from a very early age. And I understood that because of Rod Serling, because of so many of these writers that I admired, that you could aim high. You didn't have to blend in. You just had to be clear what you were sharing with the world. And Ray Bradbury was a mentor of mine for over 10 years. I'd go over to his house once a month for over 10 years, toward the end of his life. And Ray always used to say, look inward. Don't look out for your material, look inward. And that doesn't mean that you can't write about things that are different from your life. It just means that you find your passions and your true self inward, and then you put that out to the world. And so I had extremely good teachers in that way, because I think some writers, out of fear, feel that they have to imitate others or write down to their audience. I've never felt that. I'm the same as my audience. And if I come across an idea or a story or characters or whatever that excites me, usually my audience will be excited too by what I'm doing. And I trust my audience. I feel I'm with my family when I'm talking to all the weirdos.
Weirdos are good things. I like weirdos.
Yeah.
How did you know that you could actually get something made? I mean, there's a lot of people who love a certain genre, but they dabble in it, or they're on the sort of the outside, the outer limits, so to speak. How did you know, though, that you could get something made and eventually be successful at it?
Well, I didn't have in terms of knowing that I would be successful, I didn't know that. It was, there are basically two people who are responsible for my career more than anyone, which is my wife, Elaine, who I met when I was 20. We got married when I was 21. Now we've been together 45 years and married 44, and we write and produce and direct together. And my friend Michael Reeves, who was writing for television and brought me into animation when I was like 22, 23 years old. So I started by knowing, by the time I got out of art school, my degree's in painting, sculpture, and graphic arts from UCLA. And because I always knew I was going to be an artist or a writer. But by the time I went through college and then went to the Clarion Writers Workshop and sold my first short story, I knew I was going to be a writer. And so I thought, well, how do you learn how to be a writer in television? And there was no graduate school in that at the time. We're talking the late 70s. And so I thought, well, I'll write a book about one of the greatest television shows ever made, to learn how to make great television. And so that's what gave me the idea to do the Twilight Zone Companion. It was 2 years after Rod Serling's death, and had Rod not died prematurely, terribly sadly at age 50, I wouldn't have embarked upon that book, because if anyone should have written a book about the Twilight Zone, it would have been Rod. But since he wasn't with us anymore, I thought, well, let me follow this and see where it leads. Now, Elaine was invaluable, because I started writing the book, interviewing over 100 people who had worked on the show, and it started getting rejected when I started submitting it. It was rejected by 25 publishers over a 2-year period. And probably if I'd been left to my own devices, I would have probably quit. And Elaine said, no, just keep going. But we also looked at what wasn't working, which was the agent I had wasn't the right agent. She wasn't seeing opportunity to close the deal. And so I switched agents to someone who was young and hungry, and she sold it almost immediately to one of the publishers who had already rejected it, but a different editor who had grown up with the Twilight Zone and understood why people would want to read about that. And the other thing I think that was responsible for my success was sometimes people are so dogged about this is all I'll do. Like, I remember, Elaine and I have mentored a lot of people, and one person, they said, well, I want to act in a Steven Spielberg movie. And we said, well, you know, there's a lot of other things being cast. You could try for other things. No, it's got to be Steven Spielberg. And we said, you know, well, he might only do one movie every few years, and it might not have a role that's right for you. You're limiting your possibilities. So I knew I wanted to be in television, and I knew that I wanted to be writing for shows like Star Trek. But when my friend Michael Reeves was writing animation, and he said, would you like to come in and collaborate with me? I saw that as that got me into television, and then I could write spec live action features and so forth, and that moved me then into live action TV shows. But that's how I ended up writing for SMURFS and He-Man and Super Friends and all those shows. And but I always brought my A game to everything I did. So I wasn't writing down at all. Someone once asked me when I was writing for animation, they said, do you write for the child in the audience? And I said, no, I write for the child in myself. And so I would go to that place that would be delighted by the jokes or by the stories, and then just write as truthfully as I possibly could. And that worked. And so I'm very proud of the work I did in animation, as well as the work I've done in live action. I am here to provide a service. And if I can open a door for someone where they understand that it's not as hard as people make it sound, you know, that's the trick of it. You know, it's like, that's why I wrote Greenlighting Yourself, so people would know that they could be the engine that drives their career. They don't have to give up power. They don't have to wait for the studios and the networks or the publishing companies even to see their value, because thanks to the internet, thanks to the fact we all have cameras in our pockets, thanks to the fact we can edit on a Mac or a PC, there's no reason not to just make the thing you want to make, give it all of your heart and soul, and put it out to the world. That's your audience, and that's how you build a body of work. You don't have to wait. There's no reason to.
Can you succeed in Hollywood if you're not a workaholic?
Yes, you can succeed in Hollywood if you're not a workaholic, but you do have to have a work ethic. And it's interesting, in Greenlighting Yourself, in the new book, I talk about having a life. And I deliberately put it after the chapter on building from success and recovering from failure. And I point out in the book that whether you're succeeding or whether you're failing, it's important to have a life separate from that. Because having people who love you, family, friends, travel, doing things separate from the work, it gives you a breadth of experience, but it also gives you a life. It gives you something that grounds you, because you're not just someone running after the brass ring. And so actually, I know writers who have a very balanced life between family and the work, and I think that's a good idea. I don't think one should work all the time, because you run out of things to draw upon creatively, but you also run out of, I mean, you just go crazy. The isolation, Hollywood can drive people crazy simply because they get so materialistic, they get so success-oriented, driven, that they forget why they got involved in the first place. You know, I've known people who wanted to become writers because they wanted to get rich, and I've never seen it work. Maybe someone has succeeded at that, but the people that I've seen succeed are the ones who just love the work, and they love what they're creating, and they are just so grateful for the opportunity. And, you know, it's just, there's something, like for instance, I just came from a studio that I have that's filled with spaceship sets. and you know, we're building an alien spaceship. We're building this hospital on a space station. And we're building 8-foot tall creatures, and just to be in that world and be able to share that world with everyone is great. But Elaine and I try and stop working in the early evening. We work at least 5 days a week, and sometimes we'll work weekends, but we try not to. But we we'll work, and then in the evening for an hour or two, we'll just relax and watch a movie or a TV show or something, or go for a walk, or, you know, we own dogs, and dogs force you to, like, get off the sofa, stop typing, you know, go take them for a walk, and that helps let the air in a bit. I don't think you can be successful if you don't have a work ethic. And also, I think you have to stand by your word. The more you stand by your word, the more you have a work ethic, the more you have at least craft, if not. I don't tend to use the word talent much, because I've seen a lot of people who had talent who got nowhere. Whereas if you have passion and craft and a work ethic, and you, I mean, you know, the reason people support me in so many ways is because if I say I'm going to do something, I do it. And it doesn't matter if it's easy or if it's hard. If it's hard, then it's hard. I'm not going to stop. I'm not going to turn back. I have work to do. You know, I get on with it. And my mantra to myself when things are difficult is, you know, I'm made of iron and nothing will stop me. And there are times, for instance, when I did the Star Trek episode with George Takei, it was a very grueling shoot, and I said, I'm made of iron and nothing will stop me, and I had to use that. But we got to the finish line, and that got nominated for the Hugo and the Nebula, and I'm very, very proud of that episode still. And that was for Christina Moses's first TV role. We cast her out of the blue, and she's now starring on A Million Little Things on ABC. So we saw what her amazing talent was right from the beginning.
Well, you talked about talent, and talent is very long in this
Yes.
in this town. But what if someone's sort of the pendulum swings more toward a hedonistic personality type?
Well, I try not to hang out with assholes. Yes.
They could be a really nice hedonist.
Yeah.
They
No,
don't.
but I mean, I think you have to treat your body like a car that you might own. And you want to take care of it. You want to make sure that you aren't burning the candle at both ends. You know, so many people burn out. And, you know, drugs, alcohol, you know, self-destructive behaviors, gambling, all that, it's just not sustainable in the long run because it's just too hard on your mind and your body. You know, it's, you know, I gravitate toward people who have a family life. Most of the people I work with are married. Many of them have kids. I want someone who's stable. I don't want someone where I don't know if they're going to show up. And so I can make the choice of who I work with. And I've been very lucky in terms of the actors I've worked with, even when I was at the studios and the networks. I never had a crazy person. I always had people who were there to do the job. And they appreciated the fact that I was really putting everything I could on the page. And they would get these scripts and they would love what I was writing because it gave them something to act, some emotional through line. And you know, so quality work gets you quality actors, gets you quality composers. There's a ripple effect if you're doing your best work, but you can't be thinking about, oh, I've got this party to go to, I've got this. No, it's, I mean, that doesn't mean you can't have fun, you can't go on vacation, you can't go water skiing or whatever, you know, and, but at the end of the day, you have to be reliable. And that means you have to like look ahead. You cannot be such an impulse monster that, you know, it's Monday and you don't know where you're supposed to be, you know, so you can't wander the streets, but, you know, so that's, yeah. But of course, in the new book, I talk about if you're thrown together with someone like that, here's how you can deal with it. Because I had a friend who was an actress, and she was cast on a TV show, huge hit show, and the star of the show was drinking all day and being very, very abusive to people and very insulting. And but she recognized to not engage, to do her work. She was there to do her work, and she did it. And ironically, at the end of the day, the actor came up and said, "You were great." And so she had succeeded. I think often what we have to do is have our eye on the ball in terms of what we are there to accomplish. It's not about winning every single battle. It's not about going toe-to-toe with everyone. It's not an alpha dog contest. It's about what am I trying to accomplish? And so if you say, okay, well, I'm here to write a great script and turn it into a great TV show, or I'm here to give a great performance, whatever it is, you have to be clear on it. But obviously, the more that you take power, the less you're going to be frustrated by other people who are not there for the same purpose. So that's why I have my own studio now. That's why I raise money the way I do, because, you know, it's fun to be in charge, because then there's no one around to, I mean, if anyone's going to wreck it, it'll be me, but then that's my fault. You know, it's like a failing of whatever. But it's so cool to work with great people and create work that has meaning. You know, I couldn't be happier.
Is it possible for writers starting out today to have the same type of TV writing career that you had?
In terms of writers nowadays having the same kind of career I had, no, they can't really, because television's changed so much. Well, when I started out, I started writing in the late 70s and still am going strong today. I've been very lucky. Back then, most shows had freelance slots. So in other words, for instance, when I was a producer on Sliders, we had a 22 episode order for that season, and 11 of those would be freelance slots. So every day we were taking pitches from writers, and we knew we'd have to buy 11 scripts. Now we might rewrite those extensively because we knew the show day in and day out in a way that the freelancers wouldn't necessarily. But that might be that person's first sale. It might get them into the industry. It gave so many people chances to get their foot in the door, get a start. And I actually ended up writing for so many different shows because sometimes I'd be on staff, but other times I'd just be a freelancer coming in and pitching. And so it allowed me also to write for a number of different shows, much more so than if I was on staff, because, you know, usually you're exclusive to that show, or you might be able to write a feature when you're on hiatus. But on any given year, any given day, I would be multitasking. I got very, very good at multitasking. So I might be, well, like for instance, when I was a producer on Sliders, I was writing my own scripts, helping with every phase of the writing on everyone else's scripts. And, but I sold to Deep Space Nine that year, and Far Beyond the Stars. I had sold a trilogy to HarperCollins, so I was starting to write the first novel with Barbara Hambly and outlining the second one with Maya Bonhoff. And I'd also been hired to write all the outlines for Animorphs and lay out that show and write several scripts for that show. So, for instance, so I would get into my office at Universal at 6 in the morning, write an entire outline for Animorphs, and then by 10, I'd be done with that. I'd have faxed it to New York, and then the Sliders guys would come in and I'd do my Sliders job all day, and then on the weekend I might be working on the novel, so or on the outline for the Deep Space Nine episodes. So it was a great way to work, because you know how to go from one thing to another without losing quality. That's the hugely important thing. You don't ever want to be just providing fodder. You don't want to just be writing. My friend Frank Spotnitz, who created Man in the High Castle and ran the X-Files, he says, good enough is never good enough. And I agree with that 100%. He also says you should, every time you should aim for the bleachers, because you might at least get a single, you know? And I share that view, which is give it your best. I mean, you should just, everything you've got should go into everything you do. And if it's not good enough, work harder, you know? And sometimes you're not going to write the great American novel or the great American screenplay. You know, one of my friends who's in Ohio and calls me quite often, and he said, well, you know, that episode of whatever show it was, Forever Night or whatever, that show that was on last week wasn't up to your normal standard. Why was that? And I said, well, you know how like when you're in school and sometimes you really try your best, but you get a B on a test or a C+ or whatever. It's sort of like that, you know. It just didn't come together, but it wasn't for lack of trying, you know. And so, but that's part of it. And but in terms of possibilities for the writers now, they're much greater. For instance, when I started, there were 3 networks and PBS, and so they were 24/7 stations. They weren't. You couldn't watch a show when you wanted to. There was no home video. And so there were only a certain number of shows they could make just because of the hours in a day. So it limited how many writers could get work, and it limited what kind of work you could get, because if the show wasn't approved by the network, there was nothing you could do. And if you wanted to write something and shoot it on your own, it would cost millions of dollars minimally, and that was very, very difficult to raise that money. Now, there's over 500 scripted comedy and drama series on the air on all the networks and VOD platforms. And so there's an enormous amount more slots for writers. Additionally, even though there isn't freelance per se, there still is freelance in animation, but not in live action by and large. But also people can make their own web series, they can make their own podcasts. There's so many ways to get a following, to get an audience. And I say to everyone, I wouldn't go back to any other period in my life. I'm happiest of all now, because I have such great autonomy. My audience has given me over $2.5 million to open my own studio and make Space Command, and now I'm raising even more money. It turned out I had a knack, and so I don't have to ask permission from anyone. I just come up with an idea, I write it, I cast it, I shoot it, I put it out to my audience around the world. And that doesn't mean that the studios and networks and VOD platforms can't be my partners. They can, but they aren't the deciding factor of what I do in terms of what I make, in terms of creatively. And that's a pure joy.
So going back to the 70s and being a freelancer,
Yeah.
Completely different as to the tone of your day, what you're working on.
It wasn't so much different as to what I'm working on, because I was always working on shows that I had a passion for. So whether it was Sliders or even Friday the 13th, the series, which I story edited, I would always find the core of it, the emotional core, that would resonate with me. It always had to be something that I could cue into, otherwise I wouldn't write it. And I always worked with people who I liked and who liked me. And I was very lucky in that way. And the studio executives and network executives we dealt with, fortunately, were very supportive and very smart. And so I didn't find them intrusive. There are the other kind of executives, and you want to try and avoid those. In Greenlighting Yourself, I have a section on working with stupid people. And my first piece of advice is, if you can avoid it, avoid it. But if you have to work with someone who's in the food chain, they might be above you in the food chain, here's how you can do it and not have the work be ruined and not have and not be fired. And so I go into some experiences from my career where I'm able to walk people through that. And but again, it wasn't so much content that was different. It was simply, it's almost like there's a difference between performing a play, if you're an actor, to an audience versus auditioning. Because auditioning, you need someone to approve you in order to do your work creatively. Whereas when you're in a play performing for the audience, that's the direct relationship. So the more that I can be in the direct relationship creatively, the conversations between me and the world, me and my audience, the better. And really what started me on this journey of opening my own studio and doing crowdfunding and selling investment shares in Space Command and so forth was simply that so many of my friends who were the greatest writers in television had written projects that were great and should have become hit series, and the network or the studio cut them off at script or cut them off at pilot. The audience never saw those great shows. And I thought, you know, in books, once a novelist is relatively successful, then he can create a body of work, like Stephen King, for instance, or name any writer that you love. And so they have an authorial voice and a shape to their career that follows their enthusiasms and what they want to talk about at any given time. But that's not true with television writers. With television writers, for the most part, they're constantly stymied from doing the projects they're most enthusiastic about, or the projects that might even be their best work, because the studio and the networks have different objectives, which are primarily financial objectives. And again, they have a right to do that if they're writing the checks. But now that we can go directly to our audience and raise money that way, the fact that we can now shoot for so much less, because digital is so much less expensive, we can change the rules into our favor. And you know, it used to be when young people would, like young directors or writers would say, well, they're not letting me have my dream. And I would say, well, who's not letting you have your dream? And they say, well, the networks or the studios or whatever. And back when it cost millions of dollars to make a movie, you'd say, okay, well, then that makes sense. They are being stymied. But now, since, you know, they have a camera in their pocket, I don't accept that excuse anymore. If someone says they're not letting me have my dream, I'll say, you're using an excuse to avoid doing the work. Because the work is get a camera, get some people together, get the best actors you can find, make it happen. One way or another, make it happen. And a great minute is better than a mediocre 2 hours of material. But if people love it, you'll start to build your audience. That starts to build a career.
How did fear of success almost ruin your screenwriting career? And when you hear that from these other writers,
yes,
do you hear fear of success in their voice, or it's asking for permission?
I think there's always a counterweight between fear of success and fear of failure in everyone's heart in one way or another in different measures. One is always afraid of exposure. One is always afraid of screwing it up, you know, and ultimately you have to be willing to face that and get past it and get over it and get around it. Your job is to get your work done, your creative work. And with all of my mentors, whether it's Rod Serling or Ray Bradbury or Guillermo del Toro, with whom I wrote a book not long ago, I seek out mentors who are brilliant at what they do. And then one of my key questions always is, when you encounter failure or when you encounter rejection, what do you do? And because what I'm looking for are strategies that I can apply to my own life and my own career that keep me moving forward. And it's been incredibly invaluable, because you find that the higher up someone goes as a writer or a director or whatever, or an actor, their fear is still there, but they have coping mechanisms where the period that they're in breakdown is shorter and shorter and shorter. So in other words, for instance, when Guillermo del Toro was preparing to film his dream project, The Mountains of Madness, based on an H.P. Lovecraft novel, they pulled the plug on it. Universal did, because they thought it would be too expensive and R-rated and so forth. And Guillermo had other irons in the fire, and he immediately jumped over to Pacific Rim, and he was off and running. So that didn't mean he didn't feel terrible and maybe had a weekend of feeling very sorry for himself, but he got into motion, and he was already preparing for that eventuality in advance so that he wouldn't be stopped. And it's very important. You know, I think, don't be afraid of success, because success is very nice. You know, when you write a book that's successful, or a TV show that people talk about for decades, or you get a big payday, those things are fine. They're fine. I think people are often afraid of scrutiny. They're often afraid of, well, I'm a fraud and I won't be able to handle success. But success is an extremely amorphous thing. First of all, you can define what success means to you. For instance, at this point in my life, I don't need to have the $1 million payday. You know, I need to keep working creatively and getting my work out to an audience, but money is not at all what rules me. I've made choices. We still live in an apartment. We own our 2 cars outright. You know, it's, I've made choices that allow my life to be very free in that way. But for me, success is very, very clear. And I'm glad that I've been successful, you know, I mean, you know, I can look at my career and say, well, clearly I've succeeded because I've created work that people are still talking about, you know, 40 years after I did it. And also I've earned significant money writing for the studios and the networks. Until Space Command, I'd only written for the studios and the networks and the major publishers. I'd never done any independent film projects. And then, you know, because of this roundtable I mentor, I started hearing about crowdfunding, and I thought, well, let's see if I can raise money. And it turned out I could. So.
Even though Rod Serling was considered a dashingly handsome, confident man,
yes,
angry at times maybe, do you think he had a touch of fear of success? Did he mask it with sort of this pretty boy, you know, facade?
I don't think he was afraid of success. He was extremely charismatic, extremely confident, without being arrogant, but he felt that he had failed in his career, which is terribly sad. The last interview he gave before he died at age 50 in 1975, the interviewer said, do you think you've been successful? Do you think you've written work that will stand the test of time? And he said, the good writing, like fine wine, has to age well with time. He said, I think my work has been momentarily adequate, which is astonishing. And it's so sad that he didn't live till now, because he would have seen that he had created one of the greatest masterpieces of television, and he had inspired an entire generation of showrunners. I mean, every major showrunner in drama, Rod is their hero. He's the idol. He's the guy who sort of led the way. And it's really sad that he didn't get to know that. You know, so I'm sure he would have been amazed and extremely gratified.
Sure, many other, Philip K. Dick, same thing.
Philip K. Dick was a different case because he was, Philip K. Dick at least got to see the footage from Blade Runner. He knew that somebody was getting what he was doing. And so my God, he created a huge amount of work. I mean, I think he wrote 12 novels in a year, plus short stories. I mean, it's like, let's hear it for amphetamines, you know, so.
Yes, I think that did help fuel him. But also,
yes,
he had his own, what did he call, the hovel, which was his sort of grungy little.
Yeah, he was a troubled man. It was very funny. He was a troubled man, and there was all this whole thing of how drugs drove him crazy, and at the end he was raving and insane and all that stuff. And I had dinner not long ago with Greg Benford, who's a fairly conservative professor and also a science fiction writer. And we got on the subject of Philip K. Dick, and he said, oh, no, Philip wasn't like that at all. He was very sweet, very funny. His mind was perfectly together, and he knew him you know, throughout the latter years of his life. And so I was very glad to hear that, because I think sometimes the media can get an impression of someone which isn't accurate. And Philip K. Dick was an amazing writer, and I'm glad that he had friends who really saw who he was and valued that.
What do you say to screenwriters who say it's not their job to get the movie made? It's simply their job to write the script, have an idea, and get that out there?
Well, when people tell me they want to write a script, I say to them, do you want to write a script or do you want to make a movie? Because they're two very different things. And early in my career, I was friends with Charles Jaffe, who was Woody Allen's agent and then his producer. And I said, Charlie, in film and TV, where's the power? He said, in television, it's the writer-producer hyphenate, ideally the writer-executive-producer hyphenate, the showrunner. In films, it's generally the writer-director hyphenate, sometimes a producer, but often the writer-director. And that told me where to go in my career. I went into television because writers run television. And so that meant that what I wrote would get made, what I wrote would get on the screen. I'd say 95% of what I've written has been shot. And my friends who are screenwriters have lives of endlessly writing scripts for these other people who may or may not be unstable, but most of their work doesn't get made. And that I know screenwriters who've worked for decades and they've earned a good living and none of their work has gotten shot. For me, that would be a useless life because my goal is to create a body of work that moves an audience, that entertains an audience, that is meaningful to them. And so you have to know what you're trying to accomplish. So if a screenwriter wants to be a screenwriter, doesn't want to be a director, doesn't want to be a producer, then yes, they can write scripts, but those scripts may not sell, or if they sell, they may not get made the way you wanted them to get made, or you may get fired, or they may sell and never get made. So yeah, if your goal is to make a living as a writer, there are a lot of different ways to do that, or as an actor, or as a director, or as a producer. But the more you say, let's chart a path that gets my work made and gets me an income, then that's a strategy that allows you to be much more effective. And I'm not saying not to have a career as a screenwriter. I have friends who've made millions and millions of dollars as screenwriters, and they've had some great films made. But you're a little more thrown to the winds of fate in that direction. So one thing I would say to anybody who wants to be a screenwriter is get mentors who are successful screenwriters, because you must know what the rules are, because they don't tell you what the rules are generally. And unless you know what the rules are, unless you know the secret language, you will endlessly be frustrated. And the secret language, we all learn it, because in order to be successful, you have to know what, like when you're in a room pitching, you have to be able to read the room. And it's very funny because Elaine and I once went in and pitched something with someone who was fairly new to the business. And at the end of the meeting, he came out saying, well, why didn't you say this and this and this? And I said, because we were saying it, but just not in words. We knew, the person I was pitching to knew that that was under everything we were saying. And, and you also know what's a yes, what's a no, where you have enthusiasm, where you don't. There's a lot of ways to read that stuff. And many of the lessons, many people are very frustrated because they think they're succeeding when they're not. Because people in Hollywood will act like they're enthusiastic. They'll love your script, they'll love your idea, and then suddenly they seem to blow hot and cold, And it's because a lot of people want to be liked, but the moment you're out of their sight, they forget about you and it's on to the next thing. And so you can never trust their word. And so again, that's why you don't want to, a lot of people think that, well, they read the script and they really liked it. That's meaningless. It's like, did they buy it? No. But they want me to come in again and pitch again. Okay, well, that's not bad. But again, it's sort of like they really liked it, but they didn't buy it. Or when you go to an audition and they say, well, that was great, but thanks. But if they bring you back, yes, then you are making an impact. But you have to really look at cause and effect, because there are a lot of things that people feel are symbolic victories that are actually not moving them forward. And a real victory is when something gets sold, when something gets made, and when they hire you to do the next one. You can build upon success. If you're consistently not succeeding, then you really have to look at what's not working and find out why it's not working. But again, you need to have people who will tell you the truth, but be supportive. No one has a right to say to anybody, you'll never make it. No one has the right to say to anybody, you don't have ability, you're not good enough. These are irrelevancies. The people who succeed in this business are the ones who are incredibly persistent. My friend Nicholas Meyer, who directed Wrath of Khan, he said, the key to success in Hollywood is persistence with charm. because you need the persistence to get where you're going, and the charm means that they won't get pissed off at you. But again, I know so many people who think, it's like, well, I've written 10 scripts and none of them have sold. Well, you might try something that, you know, I mean, again, if like often people come to my roundtable and they've made like 10 shorts or 15 shorts. And I say to them, stop making shorts, make a feature, because you can't really make a living doing shorts, as far as I know. But if you take several shorts and link them thematically, that can be put together into a feature. So you can do an ensemble film made up of shorts, if they're linked by a character or a theme, or any number of things, or a location. And so start thinking that way, because if a feature is too big to do in one gulp, you might over the course of a year be able to make 3 or 4 shorts, put them together as a feature, and bang, you're good to go. And so I think one really has to look at where one's headed. And I think the keys to succeeding are, you have to write from the heart, learn your craft. So that means either, that doesn't mean go to college necessarily in screenwriting, but it does mean read scripts, see why they work, see what works and what doesn't. Be in writers groups where you get feedback, but it has to be supportive. That doesn't mean it's not critical, but there's a lot of toxicity. You don't want toxic notes, because they don't help you. They just put scars on your heart, you know. And find mentors whose work you love, who are authentic. Because again, as I've said before, there are 2 Hollywoods. There's a Hollywood of creepy, horrible people, and then there's a Hollywood of people who are doing the work they love. They stand by their word. They're good family people, and they're good friends and they're authentic. And that's the Hollywood you want to be part of. That's the Hollywood you yourself want to represent. You do not have to become a slime ball to make it in Hollywood. There are many, many bad habits that people have. You do not have to A, become something you loathe, and B, I strongly urge people to avoid working with people they loathe. You will not just have one chance. I mean, if you really put your heart and soul and a work ethic into pursuing this, you'll find opportunities. You'll make opportunities. You don't have to be at the whim of someone crazy, and nor should you be. But you also have to decide from the beginning if you need to be rich. Because if you need to be a millionaire, then yes, the studios and the networks are the road to take if you can. If you don't need to be rich, well, then there's a million ways to earn money. Writing books, writing scripts. You can make films that earn some money back. You can have your own YouTube channel that brings in money from ad revenue. There's a lot of ways. There are Patreon accounts. I mean, I know people who their art is being supported by their Patreon accounts. And you know, it's just, you need to talk to people who are succeeding in the way you want to succeed, and say, you don't ask them for help. You don't say, get me an agent, or open this door for me, or introduce me to your friends. No, you ask advice, and you say, how did you do this? Or when this happened, what did you do? And sometimes they'll give you answers that you can apply, and sometimes they'll give you answers that you can't apply. If you can't apply it, then keep asking the question of different successful people until you find the answer that you can apply. And you know, but there are many different paths to success, and it's just, man, you know, Rod Serling used to say, when he would write scripts, he would say, is this the truth as I know it, or better yet, the truth as I feel it? And that's words of wisdom.
Let's take another scenario, and that is someone's written what they think is an amazing script. Mm-hmm. It's been purchased, and too many hands got involved and, quote, messed it up.
Yes, and that happens often. In fact, I know some writing team where they wrote a horror script that they were very proud of, and it went through all these different writers, and they were very worried about that. And finally, the Writers Guild decided that they would have solo writing credit. But then when the movie came out, it was really terrible because of all the rewrites, and they were blamed because theirs was the only name on it. And so, you know, that's where I say, if you're willing to take power, if you're willing to take responsibility, if you say, I'm going to write and produce and direct, that doesn't mean you do it alone. You're not a one-man band, but it means that you make sure that what you intended it to be is what it is, you know. Because the moment you sell a script, you're no longer the boss. The moment you sell a script, you no longer have power. Whoever bought it has power. And so it can be any number of things. Anything can happen to it. It's like putting Moses in the little reed basket and floating him down the Nile. You know, it's like, bye, kid. You know, I mean, will you become the, you know, Moses, or will you become Pharaoh, or will you become like, you know, Joe who you know, shines the statues? You know, you have no power over that anymore because you floated him away. That's like what people do with scripts. And so, you know, when I was a writer on staff, a writer, producer, story editor, one of the things I would say at the beginning of my job is I would say, my preference is that I not be rewritten by others. I will do as many drafts as it takes, but I prefer that my work is what gets to the audience. And because I was a hard worker and a good writer, my bosses honored that, and it was very rare that I would get rewritten. And so, you know, it's, you know, you work harder, but you have less sleepless nights, you know. So, but again, it's so easy to shoot stuff now. It's so, you know, I mean, everywhere I turn, you know, I see people shooting short films or features or whatever, web series, TV shows. You know, science fiction never predicted that we would all have video cameras in our pockets. And there's so many benefits of that. And, you know, fear can stop you. Laziness can stop you. You really have to say to yourself, if I have to work hard, it's worth it, because I want people to know what I'm doing. I want to share this with the world. It has to be that, because otherwise, if you're going to be half-assed about something, then go work at McDonald's, you know, because if the fries are not the best fries ever made, then it's okay. But if you're going to make movies or TV shows, then step up. There's only, when you encounter resistance or adversity, you can either step back or you can step up. And that's it. Those are the only two choices. And if you step back, you'll never know what would have happened if you had just really put your shoulder to the wheel. So, you know, my career has been made by hand, and I'm very proud of that.
So you say with the fans, give them kind of what they want at the heart of the story, but then open the world wider. Is that sort of like, you know, the saying, I know you better than you know yourself?
Not exactly, because as I said earlier, I'm the same as my audience. So if I'm enthusiastic about what I'm working on, if I find a story that interests me, I'll be able to tell a story I think that my audience will like. I never worry, first of all, I never talk down to them. I never worry about what will please them. I'm just trying to tell a story that I think is meaningful from a character standpoint. For instance, and I'm always writing about things that I'm either love or frustrated about or want to comment on, but always it's through the characters. If the characters don't work, none of it works. And I'll give you an example. I came up with this idea called the Showrunners Network, where I'm creating 6 science fiction, horror, and fantasy series with 6 major showrunners. So it's Rockne O'Bannon, who created Farscape and Defiance and Sequest and Alien Nation and Cult. He's now EP on Evil. Another partnership I have on another one of the shows is with Mark Ferguson and Hawk Ostby, who created and were showrunners on The Expanse and also did Iron Man and Children of Men. And then one of them is a Rod Serling project as well. And so when I started this project, I sat down and I wrote up 200 ideas for TV shows. And so every day I'd come up with 10 ideas and just write them down, no censorship at all. And so then Rockne O'Bannon and I went down that list and we saw what sparked for both of us. And a pet peeve of mine is, you know, now there's certain kinds of black stereotypes you can't have on TV, or Latino stereotypes, or, misogynistic things, right? But older actors either are playing coming down with cancer, coming down with dementia, or the funny grandpa or the funny grandma. And the seniors I know in my life, and the seniors that I'm one of them now, these are vital, involved, engaged people. They are not those stereotypes. And so I was very frustrated with that. So I came up with an idea for a show called Sweet Haven. And ironically, I came up with this before the pandemic. And the basic notion is a bioengineered disease gets out of hand and kills everyone in the world under 60. And so the people 60 and above have to figure out how to keep humanity going when they can't reproduce. And so it's a very fun idea. So Rock and I worked up the plot line, and Elaine and I wrote the pilot script from the outline that Rock and I had worked up. And then we cast it, and it has Robert Picardo from Star Trek Voyager, and it's got Barbara Bain from Space 1999, and it's got Gates McFadden from Star Trek The Next Generation, and Mike Harney from Orange is the New Black, and on and on. It's this amazing, Veronica Cartwright from Alien and The Birds. Amazing, amazing cast. And they play these very interesting and active characters. James Hong from Blade Runner's in it and Big Trouble in Little China. But they are not going to be playing the stereotypes. They're going to be playing fully rounded people in that world. And so we've done 2 table reads via Zoom, and we're going to shoot it in the near future. So, but again, it's just, I was excited about that idea. And the lovely thing when you can raise money is that you don't have to worry about, oh, is this something the networks would buy? I don't care, frankly. I mean, if they buy it, great. It makes my life easier. It gives me more money to play with. But I don't, at this stage of my life, I don't need approval. I need to be effective. So it's a very different energy. The wonderful thing is, if you've succeeded, as you get older, if you have any kernel of wisdom, you stop competing with other people and you just realize you're here to find the truest expression of your heart that you can share with the world. And if people are moved by what you create, if they are made better in some way, even entertainment is not something to dismiss. It's an important thing. You've succeeded. I mean, every day I'm just trying to be the best version of myself and be open to. I love collaboration. The actors are my collaborators. The designers are my collaborators. Everyone. And even today, when Elaine and I direct with Elaine because Elaine is a better director than I am, and she's an actor's director. She was an actress and a director off Broadway, and I'm an okay director. I'm good visually, but when Elaine and I direct together, it's better. It's better. The work is better. What comes out is better. But what that allows me to do, for instance, today we were looking at sets and getting ready to shoot some scenes. We're going to shoot in a few weeks, and Elaine her vision was different from mine in terms of how many people we have in this scene or how many extras, and she wanted it fewer, tighter on the focus on the scene. And so I had to step back from what I was attached to, my way of doing it, my design in my head. I see the shots in my head and say, well, let's see what she has to say. Let's see where she's going with this. Let's see if it works. And that's a good, healthy creative instinct because it lets in the possibility of something better. And because I'm not threatened at all, just grateful, I can do that. And so when you stop trying to be, you're not in a race. You're not trying to beat anybody else. You are just telling a story. You are just sharing something that you love with other people, And I was thinking about an interesting analogy yesterday where I heard someone talking about quilting. They made a quilt for survivors of the people who died in 9/11 and the family. And I thought, it's funny. No one ever talks about pitching a quilt. You don't go and meet with a whole bunch of executives and say, hey, I have an idea for a quilt. And you spend years just telling the idea of the idea you have for a quilt. And you never actually make a quilt. People would think you were out of your mind, right? The point of quilting is to make quilts and share them with others. But writers in TV and film, they think that that's an appropriate way to spend their lives, to endlessly be pitching. And, well, I pitched this and it didn't sell. I pitched that and it didn't sell. It's like, why don't you just make it? Make the thing. Get people together. Make the work. Then you're making the quilt. You're quilting. You're not talking about a quilt someday you may get to make. And it's so much more rewarding. And I've got my feet planted on the ground and my head in the clouds. It's like Elaine keeps my feet on the ground. But there's such a lovely feeling of accomplishment when you do something and it comes out the way you want it, and it goes out into the world and people love it. I mean, even on Mr. Sci-Fi, we put out the first hour of Space Command. It's been seen by millions of people and it got 97% thumbs up. Well, that's great. You know, it's great to have that. It means that people really liked it. And you know, that helps make me eager for the next day and eager for the next script.
Were you always this way, where you just wanted to do something that meant something to you, that you were excited by, and you were staying in your own metaphorical lane?
No. No, I was at the beginning of my career, you know, I was very, there was no certainty that I would make it. And there was always I mean, I was very lucky because I started writing my first book at 21. I sold my first short story at 19, and I was writing for TV by the time I was 22 or 23. And over the next 20 years, the longest period in that entire 20 years that I was out of work was 3 months. And so I earned millions of dollars. I worked for all the major studios and networks. But there was always the sense that it could stop abruptly. And it actually did at one point. And I had to figure out a way of reinventing and a way of getting things going again. And fortunately, I was open to new ways of doing things. I was very open to that. And so that's allowed me to be where I am now. But I was not secure in it by any means. I was driven by a creative vision, and I loved writing other characters. I loved writing, whether it was Spock, Kirk, McCoy, or whether it was the characters in Friday the 13th series, or even the SMURFS, whomever. It was really fun to write through those characters, write what I wanted to say through those characters. You have to be, if I can hear the voice of a character, I can write him. You know, I have to be able to hear the voice. But I was never that secure. I was never that certain that everything was just going to coast along. So I never felt like I could just take my hands off the wheel. Going back, I probably would have done some things differently. My priority was always, I always felt that my obligation, my creative obligation was to my audience, but I often didn't take care of my bosses as well as I might have. You know, I wasn't a worker among workers in a way that I should have been. And fortunately, I still was able to create a body of work. But if I could go back and change one thing, I would be much more taking care of people in that way. And I've never been a political animal. You know, I don't care about those things. And I have worked with people who were, and I've also lost jobs to people who were, like one friend of mine was recommending me to be a producer on this show that he was creating. And the producer who was running the show didn't hire me. And ultimately we found out what he was doing was he was only hiring people who were his troops so he could eventually fire my friend because he was a political animal. But at the time I thought, oh, I somehow said something wrong in the interview. No, there was no way I was going to get that job. And my friend ended up out on his ass, you know. And that's when we realized what it was all about. But I think I could have taken care of people better, you know, and I don't regret, in terms of the work, I don't regret any of the work I've done, but that's a lesson that would have been good to have learned sooner. Yeah.
Some people aren't good at playing to politics.
No, and I don't like kissing the ass of people who are mediocre. I mean, the one thing that really, you know, I was very open to people's, you know, humanity, but I could never stand anyone who just said, well, it doesn't have to be great. It doesn't have to be good. You know, it's like, we're just here to make sausage. I could never stand that. It's like, well, you may be, but I'm not. I'm here to make something wonderful that'll last the test of time, you know, that'll stand the test of time. I'm, you know, I remember one time on Sliders, someone pitched a clone story. And I said to my boss, that story has been done on every other show, every other science fiction show. And I was saying we shouldn't buy it. And he said, well, no, but it hasn't been done on our show. And I said, yes, but the audience isn't just watching our show. And the irony was that they bought that script and I had to rewrite it. You know, I rewrote it and made it as good as I could. But the thing was, it's like, had I been making the choice of what we bought and what we didn't buy, I wouldn't have bought that because it was cliche. Already then it was cliche. And I had to fight that cliche when I rewrote it to find some meaning in it. But it was a radically different philosophy of how to make television. Because I know from my own experience that a single hour of television can change someone's life forever, for the better. It's a huge responsibility, and I never duck that responsibility. I'm very cognizant of it.
Why do you like Star Trek better than Star Wars?
The reason I like Star Trek better than Star Wars, there are actually two answers to that. I was 10 years old when Star Trek debuted, and that was the perfect age for me to encounter that amazing universe. I sometimes joke that other people have heroin, I have Star Trek. It was like, it was the thing I'd been waiting for, and I just loved it, and it's been hugely influential in my life. Star Wars, on the other hand, came out when I was in my early 20s. And so if I had been 13 years old when Star Wars came out, that would have been my Star Trek, And, but it was just, I was just a little too old for it to engage me in a way that would have really been hugely meaningful. I liked it. I thought it was a very, very good film. But also I like the Star Trek universe better. I think it has a lot more opportunity for a wide variety of stories. I think it's much more able to comment on issues of the moment. Star Trek was deliberately written like Twilight Zone. These were, Gene Roddenberry and Rod Serling were both men who had a lot to say about race, about social issues, about war, and they said it. And I think Star Wars is much more kind of a escapist entertainment. I think it comes from a very different place. But again, it's not for me to badmouth anything. I'm glad The Mandalorian has been successful. I think the more recent Star Wars films were problematical because they kind of didn't really know where they were going and would go 2 steps to the left, 2 steps to the right, and then, walk into a wall. So it was like, I feel very sad about that because it could have been better. And I think there's a problem when people decide that they're going to go deviate from what's expected and go in the exact opposite direction, because often it doesn't create good art, it just creates chaos. So I think you have to be very careful of why you're making certain creative choices, because if they don't follow the emotional line, then you're not going to engage an audience.
And also an audience that feels a very huge part of ownership in the story and the characters.
But the funny thing is that the audience's ownership of something is a fine line to walk, because you don't want to just give them what they want, because then you're just reiterating the same old story. What you want is to give them emotionally something that's satisfying, but also opens the universe wider, does something that they haven't seen before, but in an emotionally satisfying way. So, for instance, when I came up with the idea for Far Beyond the Stars for Deep Space Nine, it took us into the world of 1950s science fiction writers, which was something Star Trek had never done, but it showed the audience where we came from, why science fiction was important, why telling your truth is important, and it dealt with race in a very powerful way. And I was very, very glad that episode sold and got made, and people are still complimenting me on it 20 years later. People often don't know what they'll love until they see it, and so it's like Star Wars. If they tried to describe Star Wars before people saw it, I don't think people would have understood what it was going to be, because it sounded like crap. This guy travels around with this big hairy creature, and and there's this guy in a mask, and he's the villain, and he's it would sound like, well, Jesus Christ, and I want to be a Jedi Knight. It's like, oh God, but then you see it, and what made Star Wars great was that it was a visualization of everything we'd been reading in science fiction for decades, but had never been visualized that well. And so that's what set it apart. It wasn't that it was enormously original, it was that it was transferring to film what we'd been reading about forever, but had never seen on film. And so that was what made it so exciting. Flying through the asteroid belt and all those wonderful things, the laser battles and you name it. It was great fun. It's one of the most entertaining films ever made. So, yeah.
What do you think the new Star Wars trilogy got wrong?
That's a hard one. It wasn't for lack of trying, because I know J.J. Abrams, and I know he loves Star Wars, and I think he was afraid of blowing it, but he certainly put everything he had into it, and he certainly did a lot of things right. I mean, building a full-size Millennium Falcon, for instance. But Star Wars has a very limited bag of tricks. It's like there's the good guys, the Jedi Knights, and the bad guys, the New Order, or the whatever, it's like good guys versus bad guys, and the bad guys have a weapon and they're going to blow something up, and it's like, it's so difficult, and then Mandalorian has expanded that a bit. They put a baby in it, Baby Yoda, but it's just, there's so many ways. I mean, I thought J.J. was very clever with his version of Star Trek. A lot of people are down on that version, but I think he actually did a very good job of bringing it alive again and finding a way of reinventing it. But with Star Wars, it's like, who are those people? Who is a Kylo Ren? Who is, you know, I mean, he kills Harrison Ford. We're never going to forgive him for that. I mean, it's not like Darth Vader comes around at last and saves his son, which is a great story arc. It's like Kylo Ren put the lightsaber through Harrison Ford and he fell down and he was dead. You know, it's like, you know, it doesn't go somewhere that you want it to go. I don't care if Rey and Kylo Ren are drawn to each other. I don't know who those people are. You know, and they're like less interesting versions of the characters that we started with. You know, with Luke and Leia and Han. It's like you don't. I mean, like Poe Dameron. Who is that guy? Why do we? I mean, I like the actors very much. I think the actors generally are extremely good. But it's just, you know, where are you going? You know, and then so basically the first movie goes like this, then the second movie goes like that, and then they try and jam it back this way. It doesn't flow. It doesn't pay off well at all. It's just weak storytelling. And but again, when you view a property as a cash cow, then you just try to get your best people and try and hope that 1 out of every 3 or 4 will click, and because that keeps the franchise alive. And it's a cynical way of looking at things, and certainly not creative, but it's a machine, it's a factory. But that doesn't mean you can't get great Star Wars stories or great Star Trek stories or any of this stuff. You know, it's like each time out, it's the luck of the draw. It's not that people are trying to create crap, they aren't. They're trying to really do a great job, and if it fails, it fails simply because what they tried or the direction they went didn't pay off. I think, you know, Kevin Feige's done a great job with the Marvel universe. He's made a lot of great films. I'm not a huge fan of Marvel, but I recognize the artistry of what he's done. You need someone at the top of the food chain who really kind of has a vision, whether that's Rod Serling or Gene Roddenberry, whomever. You need that person who kind of keeps it on track. And it's hard to find those people. They're very rare.
If you were put in charge of the Star Wars trilogy, how would you have approached it?
I would have tried my best to make it good. No, I mean, here's my real feeling about Star Wars in terms of speaking as a creative artist. I think the structure of the first trilogy is very solid. And but the Ewoks, by the time he got to Return of the Jedi, George Lucas decided he was making films for children, not broad-based family entertainment. In other words, there's a certain adult quality to the first 2 films, that the third film with the Ewoks and all that. It's like, let's make some teddy bears. Let's make some products. And then when he went to the prequels, he needed, you know, he was writing them, he needed a writer who was solid. He needed to bring in a strong writer because the basics of the story, you know, the fact that the best Jedi becomes evil and then ultimately rises to the occasion to save his son, those first 6 films, that structure is really interesting, but the telling of it was very poor. And so, first of all, it was, as I say, they were films for children, and they were kind of silly, but also the writing was really poor, the dialogue was really poor, the design stuff was great. My friend Ian McCaig designed Darth Maul, but also when you're thinking of it all as something that's going to help sell toys, then you're not thinking, oh, well, look, here's this great character, Darth Maul. Why don't we give him a personality, and why don't we have him continue longer in the show, in the series of films? He was great. When Ray Park is fighting 2 guys off with 1 lightsaber, you know, it's astonishing. He's great. And they cut him in 2. I would have had him, you know, stuck back together and come on back. You know, but I think there's a lot of weird vibes in those first 3 films. It's like, hey, look, you're a 10-year-old kid and I'm going to marry you in the next movie. It's like, holy cow, you're his babysitter, and then you know, next thing you know, you're in bed with him. It's like, what? You know, it just gives you a creepy feeling, you know. And also, of course, that kid couldn't really act much. And, you know, so it's just lost opportunity.
What do you love about Star Trek Discovery?
Doug Jones, I think, is terrific. He's the lead in Space Command as well, or one of our lead actors, and he's absolutely wonderful. I think the production design is pretty amazing. I think the detail on the sets and costumes is pretty amazing. The visual effects are good. I think it's gone kind of, I haven't watched all of the 3rd season yet, but I felt the first couple of seasons were pretty weak in terms of just characterization and storyline. There's a lot of talent in that cast, but I would have developed the characters very differently. I would have gone much deeper. I think that there's a very hit and miss quality to a number of the characters where it's like, who are these people and what's the point of this story? And I think they're often talking about the emotion without actually dramatizing the emotion. And so Strange New Worlds may be the Star Trek episode, the show we're all waiting for. That's the one with Captain Pike. The fun part about that is Captain Pike was the original captain in the first pilot that Gene Roddenberry did of Star Trek in 1964. And so and now that's being greenlit as a show, so it's the longest period from when a show was pitched, when a pilot was made, to when they actually picked up the show. It's like 55 years or 60 years. That's pretty fun.
How do you think Gene Roddenberry would have felt about Star Trek today?
I think he would be have very mixed feelings. I think he'd be very glad that it was still generating billions of dollars and still popular. I don't think he would necessarily be that fond of Star Trek Discovery or Picard, simply because they are missing the opportunity of telling stories that have relevance to the current moment. I think he was very, very much someone who wanted to make emotional points that related to the real world. And I think Star Trek Discovery and Picard have been, they kind of have they're kind of drifting a little bit, so I don't think he'd necessarily like those shows particularly. But that's not for me to say. Ask him when they clone him.
What's your argument that Star Trek is better than Star Wars?
Well, my argument is, I wouldn't say that Star Trek is better than Star Wars. I would just say that it's different. My friend Mel Gilden says the golden age of science fiction is 13. And that, of course, by that he means that when you're a 13-year-old, that's when you find those things in science fiction that really speak to your heart and the universes you want to live in. It's just, for me, I remember when I was a kid, I recorded the original broadcasts of Star Trek on reel-to-reel tape in case the show never aired again. And there were no VCRs. There was no way to record the entire show where you could watch it. But I remember that week after week after week, there were stories that I'd never seen anywhere before. They were astonishing. And they had such profound meaning for my life. I remember City on the Edge of Forever, where Kirk and Spock and McCoy go back to the 30s. And Kirk falls in love with this woman who runs a soup kitchen. And ultimately, he finds out that in order for the flow of time to turn out correctly, she has to die. And so he literally allows her to be hit by a truck. He throws her under a truck. And every TV show I'd ever seen before that, the hero saved the girl. It was just a given. And in this one, he's responsible for the death of the girl. And the message was, sometime in your life, there'll be something you know is the right thing to do, but it'll break your heart. But because it's the right thing to do, you have to do it. And I was profoundly changed by that one episode that Harlan Ellison wrote. And so Star Trek had a deep, deep formative influence on me. And whereas I can't say that Luke or Leia or Obi-Wan or any of those characters, as much as I like them, changed me in any way, particularly other than entertaining me for a few hours. So I think if someone thinks that Star Wars is better than Star Trek, more power to them. I think it's fine for anyone to have any opinion, basically, as long as it doesn't hurt anyone. I think compassion has to be what rules us. And it's so liberating when you don't need to be right. When you say, this is just my opinion. If you have a different opinion, it's fine. Of course, that doesn't mean racism or misogyny or any of those things. You have to speak out against things that are really hurting people. But most opinions are just people having opinions. Is Star Wars better than Star Trek? I don't know. Not for me, but for other people, sure. It's fine. Like when J.J. Abrams loves Star Wars, I'm sure that he feels really bad that he wasn't able to do everything he wanted to do with it, So, luck of the draw.
It reminds me a little bit of the Keith Richards biography, where he talked about a lot of these jazz enthusiasts, and there were two different types. There were the ones that were sort of schooled in the bars and had learned to play by ear, and then there were others that had these theories, and they would argue it. And the film world feels like that at times.
Yes. Well, I have very little patience with theorists, You know, it's funny. You know, I think of the Twilight Zone Companion as an oral history of the Twilight Zone. I was very lucky that all the writers, directors, producers, actors were alive, with very few exceptions. I mean, Rod Serling was gone. One of the other writers, Charles Beaumont, was gone. But most everyone else was alive. And so I was able to get the direct story from the people who made these shows, who wrote them and directed and produced them, and the cinematographer and so forth. And but when you have theorists, it's like, I don't really want to hear people's theories. I don't care about that. It's so academic and so pointless. I would rather hang out with people making something as opposed to people commenting about something. And it's funny because when I wrote The Twilight Zone Companion, I wrote it to learn how to be a writer-producer in television, not... And so then when people offered me gigs to write books about other TV shows, I always said no, because that wasn't why I did that book. I didn't do that book to then write the making of MASH or the making of, you know, Hello Kitty or whatever, you know, anything, you know, My Little Pony. But, you know, so and it's funny because on DVDs and Blu-rays, I'll always listen to the commentaries of the directors or the writers of the film or TV show, but when it's some guy, some theorist, like he's the head of the film department at, you know, some university, and he has this theme about alienation or whatever, it's like, oh, I don't, go away. You know, it's not worth my time, and it's not of interest to me. That doesn't mean that you can't have larger meanings or metaphors or any of that, but ultimately, for any film or TV show or book or any work of art to have relevance, it has to touch you here. It has to move you emotionally. We love Van Gogh not because of the theory of what he's doing. We love Van Gogh because those paintings speak to us. They move us. And, you know, so that's... The one thing I do like about the modern age is authenticity is valued now. So, for instance, if people recognize me as an authentic person and that my work is in alignment with who I am as a person, or the people I mentor, the roundtable I run, if everything I do from Mr. Sci-Fi to the roundtable to Space Command to all these things are all in a line, they all speak to the same compassion, they speak to the same kindness, people recognize that I'm authentic in what I say and do, and I'm very glad that that matters. Because when I started my career, the only time someone in the audience would encounter some work of mine is by reading a book I'd written or watching a TV show. I might get a fan letter or maybe meet someone at a convention. Now, the audience is directly in communication with me. And I actually like that because it tells me I'm on the right path, because I know, and I don't need the fans to tell me what to do artistically, but it's nice to know that what I'm setting out to do is being accomplished. So it's great. Well, that's the problem. It's people who are in the ivory tower, people who are, I mean, particularly, it's like people who didn't know anyone who made that film or anyone who made that TV show. It's like, you know, some expert on Howard Hawks, but he didn't know the guy. And frequently, they'll come up with all these reasons why something was done that has nothing to do with why it was really done. It could be they were losing the light, so that's why he shot it as a one, or, you know, like one without cuts. You know, it might not have been a stylistic choice. It might have been the light was gone. Or, you know, there's always things that come out great through the wonderful chaos that production is. You know, you always see the lovely. See, if I wanted total control over what I was doing, I'd be a novelist, because novelists can sit in their little rooms and the universe can be exactly the way they want it in their work, and then they give it to the editor, and they can take those notes or not take those notes, but they're sort of the god of that universe they create. I love to collaborate. I love what actors bring to my work, what designers bring to my work, what everyone brings to my work. I love collaboration because there's such an element of surprise. If you choose people who are talented and brilliant and passionate, the work they come up with will surprise you. When an actor takes a, for instance, in the pilot of Space Command, there was a monologue I wrote for Bob Picardo where he talks about the death of his wife. And when I wrote it, I said, this probably won't work, but I'll try it, and I can always cut it out. And then Bob delivered it, and it's astonishing. It's wonderful. And so I was really glad I trusted my actors and said, okay, I'm not convinced. Let me see what he can do with it. And he surprised me because he really went somewhere truthful. And, you know, and that was me partnering with someone who made my work better. So I have nothing but gratitude.
What makes the Twilight Zone different from everything else?
Quality. It's good. Okay. The Twilight Zone is possibly the best television show ever made. I think there's an argument that can be made for that. Rod Serling never wanted to be a science fiction writer. He wanted basically to be the Arthur Miller of television. And when he was censored, when he couldn't write about politics, when he couldn't write about race, there were so many things he wanted to write about, and the censors just would not allow it. And his work, he felt his work was being turned into meaningless crap because of these limitations. He thought, well, if I do science fiction, maybe I can slide these things past and they won't notice what I'm actually doing. And that's worked. It worked exactly. He ended up writing 4 pilot scripts for The Twilight Zone before the show got greenlit. He was very determined to have that happen. And so I think it came from the fact that this was a man who had a lot to say and knew how to say it. Twilight Zone just isn't about the gimmick. The gimmicks are great and the twist endings and all of those things are wonderful. And the fact that it was science fiction and horror and fantasy allowed it to be universal in a way that had he just been writing about, you know, Medgar Evers or something, it wouldn't have been, you know, because then it would seem very dated. And the writers from that era of live television generally are not well known. You know, Tad Moselle or Reginald Rose or even Patty Chayefsky. Had Serling stayed in live TV and not created Twilight Zone, he'd probably be forgotten now, as good as Requiem for a Heavyweight was, or Patterns. But because he was forced to write in this wonderful genre and write on universal themes, fear, alienation, you know, loss of identity, it just created these amazing stories. And his scripts were so good that they would get the top actors who often wouldn't do television. And you got Bernard Herrmann and Jerry Goldsmith, these amazing composers, and George Clemens, this phenomenal cinematographer. It's just, you look at the best episodes of The Twilight Zone, and there are a lot of them, and you hold your breath. They're so beautiful in every way, and timeless, and they work. And even when you know what the story is, you're moved by these people. Because Rod had a genuine sympathy and empathy for the little guy, for someone working as a bank teller or a woman who's a secretary, or, you know, he's not writing generally about presidents or kings or wealthy people. He doesn't, even though he himself was one of the best paid writers in television, he's not fawning. He doesn't idolize the rich like some writers have. He's a regular guy. You can get the sense that he has this big heart. He really cares deeply, and he's coming from the heart. And again, when I was talking a few minutes ago about authenticity, you know, when you see Rod Serling on television, he's exactly that guy. I mean, I've seen videos of him teaching classes where he knew these wouldn't be broadcast, and he was absolutely himself, warm and funny and smart and caring. And that really comes across on Twilight Zone. This is a man saying, here's a story I want to tell and I'm sharing it with you. Or here's these other writers that I've brought aboard who have these wonderful stories to share with you. It's his gift to the audience. And it holds up because it's not about something trivial. The Twilight Zone is about something profound, deeply profound, and its meaning conveys to the younger generation as much as to the audience it was made for back in 1959.
Have you seen every episode?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Yes,
what would you say the top 5?
I have actually, when I started writing The Twilight Zone, it was Twilight Zone Companion. It was 2 years after Rod's death, and Carol Serling, his widow, was still living in the house in Pacific Palisades. His dog was there, this Irish setter, and all these, everything was exactly as he'd left. There was one room that was just the awards, the 6 Emmys and the Peabody Awards and on and on. And so in the garage, there were film cans, his film cans of Twilight Zone episodes, 16mm prints. It was part of his contract that he would get 2 prints of every episode because there was no VCRs, there was no home recording back then. So often I would go home with a stack of these film cans and put them on the projector, and they had the original commercials and the original coming attraction spots, and many of these had never even been put through a projector. They were just pristine, they were gorgeous, and so yeah, and there were 4 episodes that weren't in syndication, and then there was a season, 18 episodes that were hour-long episodes that weren't generally syndicated. Every now and then they'd pop up. But yeah, I had to do a little bit of pursuing some of these episodes that were not in the general audience. Though one of the funniest stories in that regard was that I I was researching the Twilight Zone Companion, and this was just as VCRs were starting to become available for purchase, but they weren't widely available. So I recorded the episodes off the air on reel-to-reel tape. I'm on cassette tape, and Rod didn't have copies of every episode. It got more and more hit and miss as the seasons went on. And so at one point there were like, I think 2 episodes that I could just not, 2 or 3 episodes that they just never aired on KTLA, so which was syndicating Twilight Zone. So I called the station manager and I said, listen, I'm doing a book on the Twilight Zone, and there's 3 episodes I need to see, and I want to find out when you're going to be airing them because I really need to see them. He said, well, which episodes are they? And I told him. He said, well, we'll broadcast them next week. So all of LA watched the episodes just because I needed to see them.
Oh, wow.
I thought he was going to just have me in and maybe screen them for me. But nope, everybody got to see them. And so that was really funny and wonderful. But it was great that I was able to produce the Blu-ray set and do 52 commentaries. And now, of course, I'm going to do the rest of them, the 104 that are left. And so people will be able to buy all of them. So they'll be able to hear everything I know about Twilight Zone and for all of the episodes. It's going to be great fun.
If you had to choose, what would be the top 5?
I love Walking Distance, which was Rod's personal favorite. It's about a man who goes back in time to his own childhood. It's a wonderful episode. On Thursday, We Leave for Home, which is a great episode that Rod wrote with James Whitmore. It's one of the hour ones. Aya the Beholder, which is the woman whose head is wrapped in bandages, waiting to see if she's been made to look normal. Nightmare at 20,000 Feet, which is the Gremlin on the Wing with William Shatner that Richard Donner directed. It's a great episode. I mean, I could list 20. I mean, and It's a Good Life with Billy Mumy. That's a great one where he's got the power to terrorize a small town. But again, I could easily pick Death Ship, Miniature. There's so many. In Praise of Pip. It just goes on and on. Time at Last with Burgess Meredith as the last man on Earth. Week after week after week after week, it was an astonishing artistic feat what he was pulling off. It was no one has ever really equaled it, I don't think.
What's your writing process?
I work 5 days a week minimally, sometimes 6, sometimes 7, but I prefer not to. I'm always thinking about a story, or there's always something going on in my head. I don't have regular writing hours. At various times I have. But now, because I'm writing and producing and directing and doing books as well, my day is split up into smaller chunks, and I'm often doing many different tasks in a given day because I have full-time editor, full-time line producer, VFX team, all of that. So when I sit down to write, I try to write for several hours minimally. But it's like, but I can also write on the fly if I need to. I can write almost anywhere. I can write in a moving car. I've written in jeeps traveling through the jungle in Thailand when I did a pilot for NBC that was shot there. I mean, it's like I'm often working on several scripts simultaneously. I'm always reading several books at the same time. And then I'll come up with ideas and I'll jot them down. I'll save those. And sometimes I'll write them or I won't. I mean, one of the ideas I came up with recently that I liked was, two I came up with that I liked. One was, I heard about the slave revolt in Haiti, where they actually succeeded, in freeing themselves. And I thought, what would have happened if before the Civil War that had happened in America, that had spread to America, and then now it's the modern day, and there's a separate country of the descendants of freed black slaves. So the South, it's not the Confederacy won the Civil War, and we've got 2 Americas. It's that there's a black nation where those slaves freed themselves, and what would that look like, and what would our country look like? And that was an interesting idea. And another idea I came up with, which was rather amusing, was just a short story where someone would have the chance to go back in time one time, and there's an artist who never got his due, was never recognized for his talent, and died without knowing that anyone would cared about his art. He'd been rejected a lot during his lifetime. And so he goes back and convinces the official art authorities to take him in and accept him and do shows of his paintings and so forth. And the way it would be structured is we would believe throughout the story that it's Vincent van Gogh, but in the end it's Adolf Hitler. Because if Hitler had succeeded as an artist, right, he never would have gone into politics. He wouldn't have there'd be no Nazi party, none of that. Right. And so it just struck me as a funny story that Hitler had he just been appreciated for his artwork, it would have really changed that century.
Sure.
So it was just, but again, so I come up with many, many ideas. Like for instance, when I mentioned sitting down to come up with 200 ideas, it's actually up to 300 now. Ideas for movies or TV shows where I just jot them down and sometimes I'll pursue them. It varies. There are certain ideas that I definitely will write. Like with Space Command, I knew I was going to do that, and I knew that I would write the entire season, which I have, and then we'd shoot it. So, but I'm always working on something. I'm never lying fallow, and some scripts, it's like over the next few months, we'll be writing the final 6 hours of season 1 of Space Command. But meantime, I plan to write, I mean, we're also going to write and shoot all the other 5 pilots of the Showrunners Network. And so we've written Sweet Haven now. And again, it's always just, who are the characters? What is the idea? How does this move? How does this grow? What is it saying? But it's always through characters. I mean, it's, with Sweet Haven, part of the genesis of that was my friend Michael Harney. He's in Project Blue Book, he's in Orange is the New Black, he's in For All Mankind. And yet he never gets to play these wonderful lead roles that he should. And so I said, well, how would you like to play a cop and be the lead in Sweet Haven where all the people under 60 die? But I also created his brother, who will also be playing, who went the exact opposite path and is very dangerous. And I thought that would be fun too, because I have my physical trainer, who I've been with for 30 years, Elaine and I both. He had an identical twin brother who was very, very different from him. And so that became of interest to me. So it isn't just using a cliche from soap operas, of the twins, the good twin and the bad twin. It's just the interesting thing of someone who goes very different from someone who looks like him. It's just fun. And then, so it's, but any given week I'm writing, I'm working in my producer capacity, so I'll be meeting with my VFX team and reviewing VFX shots. I'll be marketing, I'll be doing the Mr. Sci-Fi stuff, I'll be building my audience. It's all part of the job, it's all, I am, and directing. I mean, today we were just, getting sets ready to get them up and running, so it's exciting, it's fun.
When you were riding in the Jeep through the jungles
Sure.
of...
Typing.
You were typing?
Yeah, I can type in a moving vehicle.
And so this wasn't on like a legal pad? You
No.
were actually... Okay, wow.
Yeah, yeah. I can write it on a legal pad, but it's easier to type in a moving vehicle because when you're jostled and you're trying to write, you kind of, do that. But I'm very fortunate. I think it's because when I was a kid, I read books. My mom would have me in the back seat and I would read voraciously. And I think the fact that I did that, kind of meant that I don't get car sick. And so yeah, and often I've had to write under deadline in those kind of circumstances. I can write with music playing. I mean, I can be in like a busy coffee shop or something and I'm not distracted. So, I just go into that world, and, so it's very fun.
How did you figure out your writing process?
Well, in television, you have deadlines. And so you just have to you write very fast. You'll have maybe a week or two to write an entire script. The hardest I ever had, the hardest experience was I had to write 2-hour scripts in 1 week for 2 different series. There was one period of 3 months where I was writing, I think, 9 scripts for 6 different shows. And I could juggle between I'd be outlining one while writing the script for another, but there were 2 shows, they would not budge on the deadline. And so the way I did that was I would write 10 pages of one in the morning, have lunch to clear my head, then write 10 pages of the other one in the afternoon. And I did that for 6 days straight. So at the end of 6 days, I had 2 60-page scripts. And one was Forever Night, and the other was Space Precinct, and they both got shot. They both got made. And then another time, I wrote 55 pages in 1 day, which was for, I think, an animated show called Black Star. And Elaine was a faster typist. That was back when we were on typewriters. And so I was writing the pages freehand and handing them to Elaine, and she was typing. And at the end of the day, I had the entire script written. So, and that got made too, of course. And so there's a very different energy where you know that everything you write will get made. Then it becomes very pragmatic. It's not like, you don't wait for inspiration. You put in the work. You just, it's like, if I have to write an entire script over a weekend, I can, I will. I prefer not to, you know, but I find that qualitatively, there's scripts that I've written in a week that were every bit as good as scripts that took me a year. And, you know, so I'm, you know, I have faith in my abilities after all this time. I know what I can do. Though you have to know the story you're telling, because you can't afford to get lost in your script. It can't go south. You have to know. That's why outlining, particularly in TV, is so important, because you have to know what the structure is, how it tracks. That doesn't mean you can't depart from that if you know you're going somewhere better, but you just can't. There's not a lot of room for that wild experimentation, you know. So, but usually, I find that I'm clearest in terms of my writing in the afternoons. So I'll usually write in the afternoons, but I can write any time that I need to write, you know, if I'm under the gun. And I remember one time when we were shooting the first hour of Space Command, Bob Picardo mentioned that I'd referenced The Wizard of Oz in an early scene that he had with Doug Jones, but I didn't pay it off. And so we were going to be shooting that like a few days later, and I woke up in the morning with the entire scene in my head, that paid off The Wizard of Oz. And so I said to Elaine, you drive. And so while we were driving to the studio, I typed the scene. And then when we got to the studio, I went into the office and said, print this out. Then I gave it to Doug and to Bob, and that day we shot it. But that was because Bob was right. He had a great note. And, but it was just like, but that's how, sometimes the process is like that. Other times, you know, it's other times you'll have to go through draft after draft after draft, and hopefully find your way, you know. But TV has a much shorter, you know, runway, so you better be able to take flight when you run out of, you know, the landing strip. You know, it's you better be able to hit the air, and but that's why. But I love the speed of television, and I love the fact that what you write gets made. You know, it's I never could have had a happy life as a screenwriter. I don't think that would have been for me at all.
Well, that was my next question, is that what would your advice be to someone who doesn't have the advantage of a deadline? They are their own deadline.
Yes.
And they are their own audience for a while.
Work with a timer. That's what I do. We all have timers in our phones. So say, okay, I'm going to write. You have to write on a regular basis. You have to have a discipline. And it's not, so if you say, my writing hours are going to be from 9 a.m. to 12, you know, noon, and you find a space where you're not going to get distracted. You find a writing space. It could be at a Starbucks. It could be a corner of your home. It doesn't matter where it is, but that's your writing place, and people know it's your writing place, and they know that your time, that's your writing time, and it's sacrosanct. You don't do other stuff in those hours. And you set your alarm for 3 hours or 2 hours or 1 hour, whatever it is, and you sit there. And even if nothing comes, you sit there. You do the work. And you treat it just like a job, just like if you're working at a shoe store, you know, you're working for yourself. But you cannot just watch TV. You cannot go, you know, talk with your pals. No, you're a writer. And but also setting a deadline for when a draft will be done is very important. So you just say, okay, 3 weeks from now, I'm going to have a draft written. Doesn't have to be good. It just has to be the beginning, middle, and end. And then you can go back and revise. But just you go, you know. But professional writers need to treat it like a job. The best schedule of anyone I ever knew was Ray Bradbury. He would write 5 days a week. He would get up in the morning, write until lunchtime. Then he would have lunch, then he would take a nap, and in the afternoon he would attend to business. And then evenings and weekends were for the family. And he did that for over 70 years. So pretty phenomenal.
Well, these wonderful things that we have in our pockets to shoot film also are a distraction.
Yes.
And now we can check news, and now everything that we're interested in is now going to be reflected back over and over again.
And you have to be careful. I mean, again, you can lose yourself in all of these pursuits, but ultimately, at the end of the day, it's like, how committed I am how committed am I to what I say I want? And because at the end of the day, if you don't believe it, no one else will. And the only way they can believe it is if you get things finished, if you get things out there, if you, I mean, nobody ever says, I want to be a brain surgeon, but I want it to be really easy. You know, they know that you've put in work, you know, it's like, but people think that writing's going to be easy. It's not. Some days it's easy, some days it's hard. But fortunately, if you're doing it right, the audience can't tell what was hard and what was easy, which is fun, which is really fun. When it's easy, when it's good, and it comes easily, it is good. You know, I'm not deluding myself. When it's hard, though, I can struggle and struggle, and if I nail it, ultimately, the audience has no idea that it was difficult. It flows, you know, so that's a relief. So, but the script is just the blueprint. The script is just the arrow pointing the way. You know, for instance, I have to decide, like today we were having an actress try on one of the costumes to see if it worked. We were deciding if she would be on a bed in this hospital room or if she would be in like this cylinder thing that would be like with tubes plugged in and things and computer panels and stuff. And so it's like that's part of the writing process too. Determining what the lighting is going to be. Is it going to be subdued? Is it going to be bright? What color is it going to be? What lens are we going to be using? These are all creative decisions. You know, I've been acquiring, I own, I think, 14 or 15 spacesuits now. You know, so I acquire them from different productions, or my mom got me one when I was a kid. And then you redress them. I get sets from, the best place to get sets from is big budget science fiction movies that tanked, because no one saw them and the production design is great. And then you redress them so they're yours, but it gives you this level of just artistry and detail, and because they put so much money into it. So that's a trick I learned from Rod Serling, because when he shot Twilight Zone at MGM, he used every prop and costume and set that they had, you know. And when I was a producer at Sliders at Universal, I said, can I use everything from every Universal production ever made? And they said, no one's ever asked that. Let me find out. And they came back and they said, with a very few exceptions, yes. And we were using stuff from Jurassic Park and Time Cop and 12 Monkeys and on and on. It was fabulous. Best Little Whorehouse in Texas. We shot one of our episodes in that house. So, but you know, it's, I'm in the business of being ingenious. And so the more I pull a rabbit from a hat, the more that I come up with a clever idea, the more I say, okay, this is the way to get where we're going. It's a series of problems that need to be solved, but it's a joyous process. And I mean, to take something that's just in your head and put it out in the world so everyone can see it, it's just there's nothing like it. It's wonderful. When it comes together, it's great. You know, I love that process. And I feel part of a tradition. I feel in a way that Rod Serling and Harlan Ellison and all these wonderful people who inspired and guided me, I'm part of that tradition. And the reason I like to mentor people is because I feel that I can then pass on what I've learned from these amazing people. And it doesn't end with me. I'm just part of the process, part of the flow.
Have you ever mentored someone or met someone that you could just tell they weren't going to be teachable?
Yes, I have. And the lovely thing is, I don't ever assume that I have to succeed with anybody. Like one of the rules of my roundtable when I started was, everyone is welcome if they come with a good heart. There's no decision as to who's deserving, no decision as to who has talent or who's going to make it or not. If someone comes with a good heart, writers, producers, actors, directors, editors, composers, anybody, they're welcome, because we're creating a community, a supportive community. When I mentor people, if they're just not going to get it, I just stop talking, because it's sort of like, you know, when they'll say, well, this is what I'm going to do. And I'll say, well, that's probably not going to work. You know, I'm not usually not that blunt, but I'll say, well, you know, here's a few other ideas that would, I think, be easier to make happen. And if they just are resistant to that, I can say, okay, well, go with God. And also, if they come back and say, I did that and it worked, I'll say, great. You know, because again, I don't need to have, there's no one way to do it. There's a lot of ways to fail, of course. You know, giving up is a really bad idea, because when you give up, it guarantees that nothing's going to happen. But you can't just keep failing and failing and failing. You have to figure out what's going wrong. Some people can't write. And if you can't write, but you want to make film or make TV, then affiliate with someone who's got the talents you don't have and do what you can do what you're good at. Some people, for instance, Guillermo del Toro told me he's not great with dialogue. So he, he's good with plot, good with imagery, my God. So he affiliates with people who write dialogue well. You find the person, like when I mentioned earlier that I direct with Elaine. Could I learn the skills that Elaine has to work with actors? Yes, I could learn those skills, and I'm not terrible. I mean, I can work with actors. I do know what the through line emotionally is and so forth. But Elaine, having been an actor and gone to drama school and directed off Broadway, she has a depth of she has a bag of tricks that I don't have. But because I'm collaborating with her, I don't have to learn that stuff because she has it. So I can say, well, how do we get this? How do we get this effect? How do we get this actor to do this thing? And she'll then talk to them, and it's like, wow, great, So, and sometimes it's miraculous to me. Like, it's like, how did you do that? It's so good, And so that's really fun. But on the other hand, I had to teach her to not think of it like directing a play. It's like, look at the monitor. See, that angle's not a good angle. So turn them this way, and now she's much more savvy to camera angles and all that kind of stuff. So we learn from each other.
Can you explain why outlining matters to all the screenwriters who are set against it?
Yeah, I mean, you don't want to outline to such a degree that you have no juice left for the script. It's not like building a concrete wall around yourself that you can't break out of. It's basically to give you the bones of structure so you know where your story is going. Now, in television, outlining is much more important because if you're under the gun, if they're going to be shooting in 3 weeks or 2 weeks or tomorrow, you can't go off into left field. So that's where an outline really needs to be nailed down. In features, but what this really speaks to is you need to understand how structure works. Because structure, early in my career I struggled a lot with structure, and then there was one summer where I was writing, I think, all the episodes of a series for CBS, and I was writing so much and so quickly, all of a sudden it just clicked in. It was like it went right into the groove, and suddenly structure was simple for me. It was just like it was like the bones of a house, and the bigger the story, the bigger the house, but it's like the framework that holds it all together, and I understood that, and then it became just second nature. It was very funny when Michael Reeves and I were outlining the Sulu story, the Star Trek story that we did with George Takei. We were both old hands. Michael was the writer who got me into television, and at one point we're outlining the steps and jotting it down, and then about 2/3 of the way through, we just looked at each other, and Michael said, "You got this, right?" And I said, "Yeah." And then so we didn't outline the rest of it because we both knew where it went. And then we just wrote it. And but again, you have to be a really old hand to know how to do that stuff. But outlines are great because then well, Rod Serling used to say that if he knew the ending, he could write a script. But he said, yeah, I've got so many stories where it's a beginning and a middle and no end. And he said, I can't write those because I don't know where they go. I don't know how they resolve. And so rigorously outlining means you know the beginning, the middle, and the end. And because you do not want to get lost in the middle, and or at the beginning or anywhere, because a story has to satisfy the viewer. It has to come to an ending where you go, okay, well, that was worth my time, and so outlining is very important. It's not, again, if you come up with a better idea while you're writing, okay, but you have to know that it is a better idea. You can't think, oh, well, that didn't pay off. If it doesn't work, don't do it. It's better to follow an outline that works rather than experiment. But the more you write, the stronger you get at this stuff, And you just learn your craft. And craft is structure. Craft is outlining, because that's just how it works. It's like I write short outlines. I would never write like a 30 or 40 page outline. But like the most I would do for an outline would be maybe 7 pages for an hour script. And with novels, I'll jot notes. I don't rigorously outline for novels, but I know the structure. I know where the story goes, and I know who does what. But there are writers who don't outline who are still very, very good and succeed. But if you're just starting out, I think outlining is a really important tool. I would urge everyone to utilize it. But at the end of the day, it's getting to the end of the story, and however you got there, if it works, it doesn't really matter how you got there. Outlines are just a tool.
How would you teach story structure to someone who needs help?
I would say watch movies that you feel have a satisfactory ending, and write down the scenes, write down what happens, write down how the characters move through it, and what the story does, and see why that satisfies, why that works. You know, years ago I was hired to do a pilot where one of the characters was a gangster, that's sort of a bad guy at the beginning, but then he helps these two kids and he turns out to be a good guy. And I thought, well, how did they do that trick? How do you do a trick where you like somebody even though they're a bad guy at the beginning? And so I watched Casablanca, and I saw that everything Bogart says is cynical, but everything he does is moral, is ethical, and his actions are speaking louder than his words. It was a very simple trick and a very subtle one, but it worked like gangbusters. It was terrific. And so once I knew to do that, that told me where I could go. And so you know, there's thousands of TV shows and movies. Don't try and invent stuff from whole cloth. Study structures that worked. A structure is like a machine. It's like, you know, I always say don't steal plots, but study structure, because there's stuff that works and stuff that doesn't work. And the more you deviate from standard structure, the better the writing has to be. So, for instance, Quentin Tarantino can use very unusual structures, but the writing has to really be solid. So that's just the way that works.
How do you write a scene?
You try to have every scene have an emotional point, okay? You try to avoid scenes that are just exposition. That's a trap that people fall into, where everyone's talking just to explain twists and turns of the story, and they're boring scenes. You come from character. Who needs what? Who wants what? Who's longing for what? Who's hiding what they're really feeling? Who's not saying what's going on in their heart or in their head? You know, you find the juice of the scene. Usually it's conflict, but not always. You find something. I mean, usually the way it works with an audience is the structure is familiar, the details of the story are fresh. So in other words, like if you go to a certain movie, you know, okay, this is most likely going to have a happy ending. Okay, but what the characters say, how they get there, that's where you can surprise an audience, and that's where you can engage them. And so it might be a story from your life, or someone you know, or something you read, or, you know, any number of things. I mean, everything I write is a synthesis, a combination of everything and anything. For instance, I knew I wanted to do a scene in Space Command that was in Spanish, because one of our actors was from Venezuela, and he's very charming and very, very good, Victor Manso. And so when I did the bonus episode during the pandemic, I said, okay, I'm going to write a scene where he's calling his estranged father to invite him to his wedding. And so I wrote the scene in English, and I originally wrote the role of the father to be Guillermo del Toro. I reached out to Guillermo, and he wasn't available at that point for various personal reasons, but Guillermo had certain elements from his childhood that I actually wove into that scene, and it was about the son introducing his fiancée to the father and trying to get the father to come to Mars, in that case, to attend the wedding, and ultimately they want the father to move in with them, and it's about a father's disappointment in his son's choices, and then finally coming to accept who his son is and see the commonality between the two of them. And it's a lovely scene, and I was really glad to do it in Spanish because I love the idea of having different languages in Space Command. For instance, Mira Furlan and the actress who play her daughter speak Serbo-Croatian when they talk to each other. But it's a great scene with the father and the son and the fiancée, because you stop realizing it's in Spanish. You're so engaged in the people and reading the subtitles. And I had Victor translate it into Spanish, and every now and then he'd say, well, it can't be this exact thing, but this will make sense culturally. And I said, sure, fine, great. But I really love that scene because there's an emotional truth in it. And, you know, so that's great. Every now and then I'll write a scene that's just for the gosh gee whiz, you know, a rocket ship taking off, or, you know, something like that, you know, Battle on Titan or whatever. It's very funny because we were shooting the Battle on Titan where these synthetic humans, they're soldiers, and they're gunning down these freedom fighters who are human. And one of the extras didn't show up, so I said, well, I'll put on a spacesuit. I said, but you have to disintegrate me. So I'm in the spacesuit, and I get hit by a laser blast and disintegrate with a scream, and it was great fun, great fun.
Yeah, Bergman was great at that too. What is it, Sonata? The piano player daughter,
Yes,
they come. She's
Sonata.
right, and then
Yeah.
no, sorry, the piano player mother, and then
yes.
the social worker daughter, and you know it's you don't need subtitles to
No.
you know the tension and the emotion. And
well, now we have, thanks to Netflix, we know that foreign TV shows can be successful here, and that people will read subtitles, and that's fabulous. I'm so glad of that.
I don't mind me reading subtitles.
No.
I absolutely love foreign films, but yeah,
it helps to read.
So yeah, it does. Yeah,
This comes in handy.
and not just Ramona Cleary books. Yeah,
No, yeah.
Nothing against them. Yeah,
There you go.
I like those. We've heard that. I think you said this the other day on your live stream. So I'll just. We've heard that you say you don't come up with storylines unless there's a chance to utilize them. Why is that?
Well, I might come up with an idea, but the ones that I really dig in on and write the script, I'm writing that to shoot it. I'm writing it to make it. I'm not, you know, writing. It's not an exercise. I never write just for like I was going to say the fun of it. I do write for the fun of it, but I don't write something that's just going to be in a drawer. That's purposeless. And also my heroes when I was a kid, like Rod Serling, like Ray Bradbury, they wrote books and TV shows and movies. They could do all three. And so I've always, throughout my career, written books. TV is my main form. TV is my main art form and my art form of choice. But I've always written books. I've always, you know, written screenplays as well. And so, and the books were, you know, I'm really proud of the books I've done. You know, and the Twilight Zone Companion, the book with Guillermo, Greenlighting Yourself, the Magic Time trilogy of novels. They've all, I'm really glad I got to do them. They were well worth doing.
Well, what if someone says, well, I'm not there yet. I don't have anyone to pitch to, or I haven't assembled my team where we can crowdfund and make this. What's your advice to that? I mean, so should they still be writing just to utilize them, not just to sit in a drawer?
You have to learn your craft. You know, you have to know how to tell a story, and you need to get feedback so that you know if something works or doesn't work. But on the other hand, if you're shooting, you learn very quickly when you're shooting if something works. Because if the actors can't deliver it, or, you know, I really encourage people to shoot what they've written, at least to see how it works when actors are saying it. I mean, you get a wealth of knowledge from making it, because the script, again, is such a quiet object. You know, whereas if you make a short or a feature, that can start getting attention. That can start and if it doesn't work, you say, oh, those characters don't sound realistic. I have to work harder on my dialogue. Or whoa, this scene was really boring. There was really nothing happening there. You know, things will become incredibly clear when you shoot them. And that's, again, where television is such a great learning ground, because when everything you write gets made, you very quickly learn what an actor can say and what they can't. And you know, it's a very fast learning curve. And I'm very grateful for that. And but I would say to anyone, be bold. Don't be, you know, I was going to say don't be afraid. You can be afraid, but there's a saying that I have in my wallet, which is, the bolder I am, the better things go. And that's so true. You know, if you fall on your face, you'll get up again. You know, people say, well, life is like a river and it takes you where you're meant to go. I say to people, if you fell in a real river, you wouldn't say that. You'd swim like hell for the shore. You know, it's like, you know, don't just let things carry you along. Figure out what you want, but really go for it. You know, it's like, failure is not a terrible thing. They don't take you off to writer's jail. You know, if you fail, get better. It's a process. And also, by the way, you know, sometimes what you write, some people will like it, some people won't. But if they really like it, if you polarize people where some people really love it and some people really hate it, that's not bad. I mean, look at the work of David Lynch. You know, you don't have to please everyone. You just have to please someone. And the first person you have to please is yourself. And the way you please yourself is by saying, oh, I got that right. That came out well. That was great. And, you know, so the lovely thing is that it used to be that you had to come here to Hollywood to make dreams come true, and now you can make them come true anywhere. If you're in East McKeesport, Pennsylvania, or Kuala Lumpur, you can still, we've all got phones, we've all got video cameras, we've all got the internet. It's make use of what's at hand. You're in the 21st century, for God's sake. You know, you thank God, but don't waste the opportunity. You could make a short film this week. You know, don't wait. Don't wait, act. Ray Bradbury had a wonderful sign over his typewriter that I now have over my computer that says, don't think, act. And that's so true. Well, it actually is, don't think, do. And it's like, yeah, right on. Yes, absolutely.
What was the most polarizing David Lynch work? Wild at Heart?
Dune, probably.
Oh, Dune, okay.
Well, no, but Blue Velvet, one of my favorite David Lynch stories is Elaine and I went to see Mulholland. And at the end of that, was it Mulholland Drive? It's whichever one he directed, Mulholland Drive, I think. And at the end of the movie, you know, the screen goes to black, and there's that moment where everyone in the audience is just singing in the darkness before the house lights come up, and someone yelled out, "What the fuck was that?" And so, but I had understood what the story was. So in the lobby, I was surrounded by a crowd of people from the audience, telling them what the movie had been about, what it was. Because they had totally lost. They had no comprehension. And then they said, oh, okay, now we get it. But again, it's fine. Because the thing about David Lynch is he's following his aesthetic purpose. He is telling stories he wants to tell, that only he can tell. Great. You know, great.
If you only had 3 rules in which to guide your screenplay, what writing rules would those be?
Make sure that all the characters are distinctive from each other and have their own distinctive way of speaking, and know what they care about, know what they want, know them. Write them as people, not as generic cab driver, generic whatever, anything. Tell a story that pays off in a meaningful way, and not just for the main character, but try and have it pay off in an emotionally satisfying way for a variety of your characters. And have something fresh in it, fresh and meaningful, so that it isn't something you've seen a million times. I'm not here to write stories I've seen a million times. I'm here to write stories I haven't seen a million times, and that doesn't mean it can't be inspired by the tradition I write in. And it's fun. Like, for instance, in Space Command, all of the Space Command personnel are named after famous science fiction writers I grew up reading. So there's Simak and Sturgeon and Bradbury and, you know, Le Guin and so forth. And that's very fun. And the funny thing was, at one point I had a character named Murray Leinster, after a science fiction writer from the 50s. And I cast Victor Manso, who's Latino, and I thought, well, he doesn't look like a Murray Leinster. So then I had to think of a science fiction or fantasy writer, a Latino one. And finally, I remembered Jorge Luis Borges, who's a great fantasist from Argentina, and so I named the character Jorge Borges, and so that was fun. That was very fun. So, but I just, but I would just make sure it has to be original, truthful. The characters have to be vivid, and it has to take us to an emotional place that's satisfying. Those are the big ones. And I mean, a film can have a lot of drawbacks. For instance, no one script is going to be everything to everybody. You know, you can't, like, for instance, you might want to write something about transgender rights at some point, and maybe you'll put in a transgender character in one script, or maybe ultimately you want to write about that in a big way. That might be the main drive of your story. But again, I don't ever write message things. You know, you have to have a story that's engaging. Elaine will start with themes. I rarely do. I usually start with a character or an actor that I want to work with, or it can be almost anything. It can be almost anything. And but I always arrive at the same place, which is a story that I want to tell.
So just as there's the Bechdel test, is there a message test so that we, as filmmakers, okay.
Yeah, you know that it's a message film if when the lights come up, everyone's gone. You know, so you know, I mean, you know, I mean, Rod Serling used to be very cognizant. He had a lot to say, you know, politically and socially, but he knew that you had to create characters that the people cared about. Like when Burgess Meredith is the last man on earth, you care about him, you're engaged by that man, and you feel sorry for him. What happens to him? You know, it's. I mean, I don't know any really good writers who don't put the focus on character. In science fiction, you know, whether it's Deckard in Blade Runner or whomever, you know, there's people that you care about. Ripley in Aliens, I mean, great example. You have to, there's so many films and TV shows where you don't care about the people and it's just forgettable. It's just forgettable. So it's really important to do that. And, you know, and again, I'm not here to change everyone's opinion. My goal is to convince people to be compassionate and to convince people to be, that the power of love is important, that we are united by our commonality far more than we're divided by our opinions, you know. And so that's what I would urge people to recognize, you know. And so that's, I mean, my big message is compassion. And that's a good message, I think, to have.
Why do we care about Ellen Ripley?
We care about Ripley because well, first of all, in Aliens, she cares about someone other than herself. She's trying to save that little girl, even if she dies. She's willing to sacrifice herself, but also she's the smartest person in that movie. She's the most competent person in that movie. That story is about her where she starts traumatized, and step by step by step, to save other people, she has to take control and command. She knows what she's doing. And the fact, and again, it's a great marriage between character and actress, because Sigourney Weaver is able to play a powerful woman where she's no less feminine. She's just competent. And you believe every single thing she does in that movie. It's terrific. It's one of my favorite films. It's a great film.
How was she received? How was that character received at that time?
Well, it's very funny. When Alien came out, you know, originally Ripley was a male character, and they changed her to a female character. And I thought it was great. But my brother Jim, my brothers grew up in Orange County. I grew up in LA. When my parents divorced when I was 3. And my brother Jim said, "Oh man, that woman, she was such a bitch." He was like so traditional. Now I think he'd have a different opinion. He was young back then. But it's like he was from a much more conservative background. And it was like, you know, so he was like riled up about having a woman character that strong. But I thought it was just great. I loved it from the first.
So, and that was what, 83?
79.
79, oh, sorry,
Alien was
okay.
79. Aliens was 86.
Okay.
But the fun part was, before the pandemic, 2019, I heard that there was a high school in Bergen, New Jersey, and it was, the art teacher and the English teacher had an idea that instead of doing like, you know, Brigadoon or Oklahoma for their high school play, they would do Alien, the entire movie. And they built everything from scratch: the alien suit, the 15-foot space jockey, the space suits, the chest burster, everything. And they thought they'd just fly under the radar, that no one would hear about it, just the parents would come see it. But then, of course, it went viral. So Ridley Scott put up some money, and they were able to put on another performance. And they were in the eye of the media storm. And so I flew to New Jersey, North Bergen, New Jersey, to spend the day talking to the students. So, because I knew they were going to get a lot of promises from Hollywood, and I knew those would all be false probably and would fall flat and their hearts would get broken. And I want to say, here's how it works. And if you come to LA, I'm happy to guide you, and you can all be members of my roundtable wherever you are, and so forth. And so I spent the day with them. And then, as a surprise, Sigourney Weaver showed up. And she hung out with the kids, and she introduced the play, and it was just wonderful. I actually posted the entire play on Mr. Sci-Fi, and it's great when the chest burster comes out and there's blood everywhere. It was wonderful. And I said to them, I said to the kids, this is Hollywood. What you're doing right here is Hollywood. Hollywood is wherever you're creating something that has meaning, something that you gave it your really best effort. And it was I'm so glad I went. It was a wonderful experience.
That's great. I'll have to check it out.
Yeah.
Maybe we'll put a link below this video.
It's really fun.
Awesome.
Well, people can watch, you know, the first hour of Space Command. They can watch the bonus episode. They can watch that. They can watch my Sulu Star Trek episode, all on Mr. Sci-Fi.
Sure. And you and Elaine.
Yeah.
Talking.
It's super fun.
Yeah. It's enjoyable. Then we get to see your dogs too.
Well, I love the fact that I get to have my own network. I mean, I wasn't planning that. I just had lunch with Glenn Mazzara, who was a friend of mine who was the showrunner on Walking Dead, and we were having lunch, and he said, you know so much about science fiction, you should have your own YouTube channel. And I thought, good idea. And so I called it Mr. Sci-Fi and just started it up. I didn't do anything really to promote it. Now, as I said, we've had millions of hits and closing in on 100,000 subscribers, and it was just like great, because I can do something short or something that takes a lot more effort, but you know, it's really fun because I'm so enthusiastic about science fiction. I've loved it since I was a kid.
And Sulu, why should we care about Sulu?
Well, when I was a kid watching Star Trek, Sulu was my favorite character. And because George Takei was just so great, and he was so smart and so competent and loyal and honorable and just wonderful. And he never got the great Sulu episode. And I then found out that there were a group of fans in upstate New York making their own Star Trek episodes. And Walter Koenig, who played Chekhov, was flying up there to make an episode about his character. And Dorothy Fontana, who story edited the original Star Trek, had written that script. So and my friend Michael Reeves, back when they were going to bring Star Trek back as a series in the 70s, came up with this great Sulu story. And so I contacted the guys in upstate New York and I said, listen, Michael and I both wrote for Star Trek The Next Generation, and Michael's an Emmy winner. Would you be interested in doing this episode? And they said, sure. And I said, but I want to direct it. And they said, fine. And so then I went to George and I typed up the outline of what the story was going to be. And I said, look, you never got the great Sulu episode you deserved. And I said, this is it. And so he said, I'm in. And Michael and I wrote the script, and it took me 6 months to prep. And it took a solid year. We shot it in a matter of 2 weeks, and then it was a solid year of editing and visual effects, had 700 visual effects shots. And when we were shooting, I said to George, next year, you and I will be in Japan, speaking to the World Science Fiction Convention and screening this episode, after which we'll answer questions, and you'll be answering in Japanese because he's fluent in Japanese, and I'll be answering in English. And I said a year after that, we'll be nominated for the Hugo, which is the top award in science fiction, and all of that happened.
Oh, wow.
And so because it was, I'm proud, I'm very, very proud of that episode. And it's I gave every bit of everything I knew how to do in that, to write and direct and executive produce that. And my contract was that no one could touch a frame of it. I had total directorial say. And so it's exactly what I want it to be. And as I say, we cast Christina Moses, and she's phenomenal. Every take was just gorgeous. And I've worked with her since. She's in Space Command now, as well as being in a Million Little Things on ABC. But she'll be in Magic Time and some of the other projects we're doing. So it's fun. You build an ensemble of friends who you love to work with.
How much of what you write is trying to be original versus trying to give the audience what they want?
Well, I'm pleased when the audience gets value from what I do, but that's not why I'm doing it. I'm doing it because I have something I want to say, something I have experienced or something I've observed that's meaningful to me. And it's so, and there's just so many wonderful pieces. I mean, the lovely part about what I do, because of it's science fiction, I get to create a universe. And that's the thing that science fiction brings that other genres don't tend to. If you see a story set in the modern day, it's just about those people. It's about that story. But if you tell a really good science fiction story, the universe is a separate character in a way. Like, for instance, Blade Runner, you can do stories in the Blade Runner universe. You can do stories in the Star Wars universe or Star Trek universe. And that's extremely beguiling. And I love that. And it allows you also to work with visual design. And because I was a painting, sculpture, and graphic arts major, I have a very strong visual sense. And I also know the history of science fiction design. I mean, I think it's incredibly cool and unexpected that we have big silver spaceships now, thanks to Elon Musk. They look exactly like the ones I saw in When Worlds Collide or on the book covers from my childhood. And that's just a thrill. I love bringing a science fiction reality to the screen. It just used so many of my skills and enthusiasms.
Do you think you'll be going up to space in one of the various carriers? Okay.
We'll see what happens.
There's a few to choose from.
It's not something that I'm eager to do, but it's not something I would mind doing either. But I do personally know astronauts and scientists at NASA and JPL, and all of that stuff's really exciting. So there's a member of our roundtable who's a science fiction writer, and his day job is he drives the Mars rover.
Oh, that's a cool job.
And he has 2 watches. One is on Earth time and one is on Mars time.
Nice.
Which is just super cool.
Yeah. Sorry I'm late. I was,
yeah, exactly.
I hit a crater. Oh, wait.
Yeah,
No.
yeah, wrong watch. Yeah. But yeah, very fun.
How do you build a character from scratch?
Well, it can come from a lot of places. what I do is I keep a list of people that I've known in my life and actors that I love, all of whom are very distinctive and have different ways of talking. And every time I write a script, I cast it with people who are very distinctive in my mind. In some cases, it's actors I'm going to be working with. So for Doug Jones and Bob Picardo and Mira Furlan and Bill Mumy, I wrote those roles for them for Space Command. But in some cases, it might be an actor that I'm not going to get. Like, for instance, I wrote a script called Fugitive Space, and the template I used for the lead was Ed Harris in The Abyss, because it was a great character and a great voice, and I could see him very clearly in my mind. So I knew that Ed Harris wasn't going to play that role. He's too old for that role now, for one thing, but it made the character very real, very alive to me. And so you just make sure that nobody is just flat, nobody's just there for exposition. I don't tend to describe the physicality of a character, because often you might have something in mind, but there might be an actor who doesn't look a thing like that who's great, and you don't want to limit it. And I also very much want diversity in my cast, Asian, Black, different countries, more the better, you know. And so that's also part of the design. I cast a lot of actors from restaurants I eat at. The waiters and waitresses are all actors and actresses. And if I find someone who's good or who intrigues me, I'll say, send me your reel, and I'll cast them. Yeah, I've done that a lot.
That's great. I like that. Yeah, and also too, you can see how on they are.
Yes.
Well,
there's a restaurant called Granville in the Valley, and there was a young actor who looked exactly like he could be the son of Ethan McDowell, who plays Jack Kemmer, the lead in Space Command, and he was an actor, and I cast him. He's in the bonus episode, and he's great. He does a great job. So he'll be in more episodes coming up.
What mistakes do new writers make in writing characters?
New writers make a lot of mistakes in writing characters. Usually the biggest mistake is they're just flat. They all sound alike, and they just are saying exactly what they're thinking. In real life, people don't say what they're thinking generally. They might say what they're thinking directly in an argument, but often not even then. So you want to think about how people really talk. And also remember that a script is not a representation of real life. It's like a 120-page haiku. And it's an illusion of reality, but it isn't reality. And so often the lines have to be a lot briefer and a lot punchier. But I always like to have characters who talk differently from each other, who are very different in their outlooks, their worldview. Also, a mistake many writers make, not just in the beginning of their careers, but throughout, is that it's about the plot and the characters are just serving the plot. And that's not a good idea. You want the plot to be servicing the characters. In other words, for instance, Aliens has a wonderful plot, but Ripley is at the core. She's the heart of that movie. And if that movie were about people you didn't care about, and that movie also, by the way, introduces a wide variety of characters incredibly well. So if you look at when they all wake up from the sleep pods and you meet all of those characters, they're very different from each other, and they have their own take, and you get who they are really quickly, and there's a lot of them. And so studying that, just saying, okay, how did that work? And it works like a charm. It's great. It's great.
And if you said so because Ripley was not a flat character,
no,
but if some things had been slightly...
Well, if she were a flat character, you wouldn't care about that movie. It would just... How many movies are based on aliens where they're like big science fiction movies, and because the characters are forgettable, the movie is forgettable. You don't love movies because of the plots generally. You love movies because of the characters. And and I think a lot of films are too clever for their own good, because they're just twisting and turning the plot in violation of the character, and you never want to do that, because the moment the audience distances from the character, you've lost them. And I don't like puzzle boxes as a structure. You can have mystery, you can have revelations, all of that. That's fine. But I like to have characters you don't lose the characters because of what the plot is doing, And so that's, yeah. And you don't throw them away either. You respect your characters. That doesn't mean they can't die. They can, but you give what they do meaning. You never treat anyone as disposable, in my opinion.
And so with the dialogue, knowing that it's going to be distinct for each character, do you think a lot of new writers start out thinking, okay, I'm going to do sort of an Aaron Sorkin-esque, sort of, very talky, witty?
Well, also that's another mistake that beginning writers make, which is they're talking, like get in and get out. It's like make your point and then on to the next scene. Don't belabor it. So they're much too wordy. And also, yeah, imitating Quentin Tarantino, imitating Aaron Sorkin. Try not to. Serling said when he started out, everything he wrote was bad Hemingway. He said everything began, it was hot. And that's forgivable in young people. But again, you have to find your own voice. You have to find, and the way to find your own voice is, what do I care about? What do I know about? What do I alone know? And that it doesn't mean you can't write things that are different from what you've actually lived. But what do you know about, and what do you care about, and what gets you riled up, and where do you live emotionally? And then if you hear someone say something just in your day, I always carry a little notepad with me and I jot things down, because if someone says a line that's like, wow, that's great, it's like I'll utilize that, and try not to rip off dialogue from other movies, because God, it's so many people rip off lines from Aliens, and it's like, oh, please don't. And so that's part of it. And don't bore. If something's boring to you on the page, it'll be boring to everybody. So keep working on it until it works. And sometimes a scene doesn't work, and the only way to make it work is to get rid of it. And so be willing to do that. It's funny, I was giving notes to someone last week, and they were saying, well, does this character work? I read their script and gave them notes. And it was a script that had been in development at big companies. And he said, does this character work? I said, no, lose them. They don't work. And and he was saying, well, what about this sequence? I said, no, it doesn't work. And I said, here's what your story is about emotionally. It's about a father and a son, and the son doesn't think his father loved him, but in reality his father did love him and shielded him and sacrificed his own life, but the son doesn't know that. And ultimately, the son is willing to do that for his own daughter, but the father's spirit saves them. The father comes back as a spirit. It's a fantasy film. And once I said, this is what your plot is, and everything else is distraction. And so don't keep pulling it in this direction, pulling it in that direction, follow the emotional line. And because that'll work. And so then I just kind of took it, helped it along. And again, do they have to do my version of their film? No. But they have to do a version that works. And if my version helps them find their path, great. And because many films don't know what they're trying to say, or they have nothing to say. What are most films about? Most films are about 2 hours. So, it's like, know what you're trying to say, and then remove the stuff that doesn't say that.
What's your favorite piece of dialogue that you overheard personally that you jotted in your little notebook?
Yeah, gosh. I don't remember, and sorry about that. It's like, I remember one of my favorite lines that I ever wrote. It's a terrible line. It's terrible. They're in Fugitive Space, which is about a future where we trade our worst prisoners with alien prisoners. They breathe methane, we breathe oxygen. The prison that's holding the humans is on a methane world, so we can't escape. They can't escape our prison here on Earth because it's oxygen. They don't breathe oxygen. And it's about a prison break that erupts at the handoff point, a space station between the two races. And the aliens are like 8-foot-tall vertical jellyfish. They communicate via chromatophores. Really fun. And we're going to be doing that as a TV show. But I had this guard who was like really sadistic. And at the end, he saves one of our characters and he dies. And when he dies, he says, I don't know why I did that. And his boss, the head of the guard says, he was a prick, but he had balls. It's such a stupid line, but it's like, that's pretty good. That's funny.
Yeah.
And again, but again, it has to be that character who would say that line, and I think he was a dick, but he had balls, whatever it is, but again, the reason I like that line is because this is a script that has rougher talking characters. You'd never have that line in Space Command, for instance, which is much more a family show, but Fugitive Space has very rough language because it's convicts. But it's about the industrial military prison complex, because ultimately two prisoners. One is a woman helicopter pilot who's been framed for a wartime massacre, and the other is a former cop who killed his fellow officers because they were going to murder a family. He was a dirty cop, and that was the line he could not cross. But he killed them with premeditation, his brother officers, and so he's a trustee now in the prison, but a convict. But they find out that the Earth government has struck a deal with the aliens. The aliens are fighting a war that they're losing, and so Earth has struck a deal with them that they can invade Earth, empty out all the ghettos, and use all the poor people to fight in their war, basically as slave soldiers. And so our heroes have to get back to Earth and warn everybody and build a counterinsurgency. So it's about something meaningful to me, which is the people, the underclass, the people who anything can be done to them because they don't, quote unquote, count. And I write about that thematically a lot. That people need to be given respect. People need to be seen as human and as equal to us in every way. And so it's going to be a very interesting show. But I created the characters who speak a certain way so that line works in that context. But the hero doesn't say that. I just have this tough prison head, the boss of the prison guard, sort of a Charles Durning. I use Charles Durning as a model for that guy. And even though Charles Durning is an older actor who passed away, but he's very vivid in my head. So that allows me to write him. So there you go. But I've written other lines, but it depends, on any given day.
How does a screenwriter know that what they've written is good?
Writers are often misled in their own opinions of their work. They think the script is great when it's really not. You need response from others, and you need to really listen and not defend your work. Now, when you work in a mass medium and you hear back from your fans or the show is a success, then you know. And also, as you get more and more polished in your craft, you often know. You know when something's at least competent. You know when you know what will work. But the funny thing is, I often write scripts, and Elaine is the person I get notes from, and she often says, "This needs to be better. This needs to go deeper." And it's like, oh, okay. It's like, and that's good. That's good, because if something doesn't have the depth or the emotional line, I need to know that. And frankly, I wrote one of the 2-hour scripts of Space Command, and we could absolutely shoot that draft. We absolutely could, and it would more or less work, but it's not good enough. So we're going to scrap that entire draft and start over again. And I've actually already done that. And there's characters we won't see that they're in there, and those characters work. But the story as a whole isn't as good as we can make it. So we're going to go back to the drawing board, and that's fine. It's harder work, but eventually I may publish, the Lost Worlds of Space Command and include that script so people can see where it started, because it's an entertaining read. But I need people in my life who tell me if something's working or not. But at some point you draw the line and you say, okay, we're rocking and rolling. We're not gonna, because you can endlessly rewrite. And there's a point where that's again where television is good. If they're shooting on Monday, at some point you gotta say, well, we're done, and roll camera. So, but you make it as good as you can. But then remember that when you're the writer, producer, director, the editing phase is the final draft of the script. So in fact, with Space Command, we're editing, we're finishing the second episode with the visual effects and everything. And I realized there was one scene that we needed to add. So we went back to the dailies, we called our actors, we got some ADR lines, we put together a scene that we never shot. And there it is, and we'll have a visual effects shot of this ship landing and planting a part of a wrecked ship to use as an explosive on the big alien ship, and it'll work. And no one will know that we never shot that scene. So I love so it's prestidigitation magic, so it's fun.
What about the reverse, though? What if someone says, this is horrible, and I know this is crap, and someone else reads it, and there's no agenda for this person, and they go, actually, this is really good. No, this is terrible, this is terrible.
If the check clears. I mean, if someone wants to buy a script of yours, it doesn't matter what you think of it, let them buy it, But on the other hand, let's say you've written something and you think it's crap.
Right.
And they love it.
Or someone loves it and encourages you.
The way you know if a note is correct is that everyone is saying the same thing. So in other words, if 5 people read it and they all say, I just hated when he killed the dog, then you better rewrite that, But on the other hand, if one person loves it and you don't like it, well, they don't have to, I mean, it's like, then you can say, well, let me see if there's something of value here, but don't be slavish to their opinion. They could easily be wrong, you know? So if they love it, that's fine. If they're going to buy it, let them. But don't, I mean, you might reread your script just with a mind toward what maybe they're valuing, but don't trust it as holy writ, because they're probably wrong. And, you know, so, but at the, you know, that's, you know, but that's very rare that someone says something that you think it doesn't work and other people say it does. That's very rare.
That's what I was wondering. Okay,
You know,
so,
it's, yeah, usually you think it's great and other people think it sucks.
That's
you
what
know?
I was
and
wondering.
So that's
okay.
where you need to, yeah.
Wanted a reality check. How delusional
yeah,
are writers?
Yeah, but there's always going to be people who aren't on your wavelength. So for instance, if I'm doing science fiction and someone doesn't cue into what I'm doing because they're not a science fiction fan, there's no right or wrong to that. It's just they are not, their head doesn't live where my head lives, you know, and that's fine, but they're not going to be my audience. They're not, I don't need to convince them. I don't need to rewrite. You know, you have to be very careful of bad notes, notes that wreck your script. And you don't, that's where you really want to make sure that the people who are giving you notes understand what you're trying to do and can make it better, but not throw it out. And like if they say put a bank robbery in it when it's, you know, a love story or something, it's like, what? You know, and that happens a lot. So that's one reason why I'm not that big a fan of writing groups unless it's professional writers. Because you can just, writers groups, that's why, for instance, my roundtable is not a writers group, because I don't want people giving each other notes and tearing each other apart and falling into cat fights and gunfire and whatever, you know, it's like, no, it's like, you know, professional writers generally will know if something's working or not. They'll just be able to say, well, okay, here's this. Another thing that's fun is even in drama, it's good to have comedy, humor, jokes, but not at the expense of character or plot. So if you, for instance, if you look at Aliens, Bill Paxton is the one who's given all the jokes, basically, and they all land, but that's because that's a part of his personality. It doesn't take away from the fact they're afraid, that there's monsters coming after them. That is never, he's never laughing at that. He's nervous and his coping mechanism is make jokes. And so that's, and he's great. Bill Paxton's just great in that movie, you know, so, but yeah, I mean, a lot of people make mistakes. You just have to be willing to grow and to learn. You just have to be willing to hear people, but not be slavish to them. You have to decide that no matter what, you're not going to quit. And that doesn't mean you make crap. It means that whatever it takes, you're going to learn what you need to learn. You're going to partner with who you need to partner with. And no matter what the world does, you're going to get to the finish line. That's all it is. If you take responsibility and if you take power, and if you decide that the one person who will be responsible for your success is you, then you can't be stopped. There's no way to stop you. You're on your path. And it's great. It's a great thing to wake up with the knowledge that you're going to create something wonderful and the world will see it. And you're not a puppet dancing to someone else's strings, you know? You're not enthralled to anyone other than your creative vision. You know, it's a great feeling. You know, I think the fact that, I mean, I came out of the subway in London, the tube, before the pandemic, and I was going to a pitch meeting with the BBC, Elaine and I, and someone on the street said, "Space Command, Mr. Sci-Fi." Great. So great.
Oh, wow.
And I was walking my dogs recently, and there was this Russian family. We live in a Russian neighborhood. Russian family walking across the street, sort of laterally, these refrigerator-shaped people. And the man saw me with my dogs. He said, "Mr. Sci-Fi, I love your commentaries, particularly Star Trek Discovery." Thank you. I mean, it's wonderful. I mean, how could you not love that life? You know, it's great. So yeah, so it's the one thing that makes it all worthwhile is that when you do it right, when you've written a script and it's gotten made and it's gotten out to the world and what you wanted to say is what you said and people really valued it, it stands the test of time. It lasts decade after decade, maybe hundreds of years. And you know that you've done something worth doing. It's a great feeling, you know? You're not just kind of punching a time clock. And the lovely part is that you can work a day job and still do your art, or you can make a living from your art. Either path is honorable, and either path gets your work out to the world, and that's what really matters.